Dave Smith. I was sitting in my car. She was parked at the end of the Rivertown Diner parking lot. My car was parked in front of the Pines Motel parking lot, and across the street I could see its tattered sign and faded walls. It was a sad place. It's strange, but I was thinking about Sue. We met when I was 8 and she was 9. Our family moved from the East Coast, where all my friends were, to Rivertown. I was depressed. But when we moved, a beautiful girl was watching us from the other side of the street. She came up to me as I sat looking at the movers and said, "My name is Sue Redmond. What's your name?" I smiled, my mind flashed. She's so cool. "I'm Dave Smith." "It's great that you're moving, Dave Smith," Sue replied happily. "There are no children on our street at all. We can become friends." And we became friends. She was a year older than me, in the 4th grade, and I was only in the 3rd. Sometimes her friends would tease her for being friends with the younger ones, but we were like brother and sister. She turned out to be a real tomboy, and we often went into the woods 2 blocks away, climbed trees, or took fishing rods and went fishing. We made other friends over the years, but especially in those early years, we were best friends. In high school, everything changed. Driving and dating became important. She could do all this a year earlier than me. First, we discussed her dates, the guys she liked, and the reasons for her choices. I realized that I didn't like it. We were close, like brother and sister, but it became increasingly clear to me that I did not think of her as a sister. At the end of her 3rd year and my 2nd year of high school, her parents went away for the weekend. Sue was very popular, and her mother was worried about leaving her alone at home. Sue promised that she would not go on dates or go to any parties while they were gone. The mother said she didn't want any of the boys coming to their house. Sue promised that no one would come. That Friday, as she was getting ready for school, she again promised her mother that she would not tell anyone that her parents were leaving. She turned down Bobby, her current boyfriend, when he suggested they meet, saying she was busy with her parents on the weekend. She apologized to her mother for this little lie, but added that they did have plans, just not joint ones. She was going to spend the weekend sunbathing in the backyard and was expecting her parents on Sunday. I was bored on Saturday. Nothing was happening, so I decided to go across the street to see what Sue was doing. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Sue often lay on a towel in her backyard, sunbathing. The yard was secluded behind tall bushes and old trees. There was grass, and the sun was shining most of the day. I took a detour and, of course, found her. She lay there with her eyes closed, and I greeted her, long before I got close enough to startle her. "Hello, how is my little brother?" she asked. "Everything is fine, now even better." "Why is it better?" "I was bored. It will be nice to sit with your best friend." We talked. I felt hot, even though I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I took off my t-shirt. I didn't think about it. I don't know if I started looking at her differently without a t-shirt or if she was looking at me, but suddenly she said sharply that she promised her mother not to let the guys in while they were away. I was shocked and disappointed. I tried to tell her that I was hardly a guy, but she didn't want to hear it and sent me home. After that, we were still best friends, but we began to grow apart. I turned 16, got my license, and started dating girls. She also dated all the time. A year later, she graduated from school, and I saw her even less often. She started working to pay for her local college tuition. Our lives no longer intersect. The following year, I graduated with honors and received a full scholarship to UCLA. I worked in Los Angeles while I was studying and, except for Christmas, didn't see the Midwest until after I graduated. But we were destined to meet Sue again. I've been sitting in the diner parking lot for 20 minutes. Despite its shabby appearance, the Pines Motel had one feature that made it popular. It was an L-shaped building. The office was at the front overlooking the road, and the rooms were in a row perpendicular to the road, with parking directly in front of them. The office hid the numbers and parking lot from prying eyes from the street. To many who only used motel rooms for a couple of hours, this feature seemed remarkable. But this was only at first glance. The Rivertown Diner was located next to the Pines Motel, and most of its parking lot was in front of the building. But when the restaurant was full, people had to park in the back lot. This rear parking lot provided a direct view of the rooms and cars parked in front of them at the Pines Motel. More than one pair of lovers was accidentally noticed by friends, relatives, or even spouses, some by accident, and others, like me, specifically waited. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't know when exactly. It wasn't up to me. My thoughts wandered to California, UCLA, and Mali. I studied engineering. Most of the students in my classes were men. One very notable exception was Molly Thompson. She was wonderful and was much more desirable than good grades in almost all of our general courses. While most of the young and ambitious engineers tried their best to be close to her, she was not interested in her classmates. She was dating someone, but clearly not from the circle of nerdy engineers. This changed when we were in our senior year. Unlike my classmates, I never tried to get her attention. I didn't like the fact that she considered herself superior to us, so apart from discussing calculus, structures, and thermodynamics, we barely communicated. She met in her circles, I in mine. Just before my last semester, she asked me, "Dave, you never asked me out on a date. Why? You've always made it clear that you don't like engineers." Yes, you're probably right. But after all this time that we studied how everything works, how things work, I'm already tired of these businessmen. Do you understand what I mean? Let me say this. I thought you were the most beautiful and desirable woman on campus since freshman year. I would ask you out many times if I thought I had a chance. So if you're thinking about it now, how about dinner and a movie on Saturday? It seemed to me that her eyes became a little moist. You are so sweet and made everything so much easier than I could have expected. I'll be happy to go. We went on a date. That first evening, she made it clear that she was ready to come to my house, but I had real feelings for her. I wanted to get to know her better and was afraid that if I went straight to sex, my younger mind would prevent my older mind from getting to know her the way I wanted. We kissed a little in the car before I walked her to the door. "You're weird," she said, "and that's because I thought we could get to know each other better tonight, you know. Molly, we have known each other for almost 4 years, even if only as colleagues. I would like our relationship to become something more. Much bigger, I think. But if we immediately become lovers, I won't get to know you as much as I would like." This is weird, Dave. It's probably nice, but do you really put sex on such a high pedestal? Sitting in the car and waiting, I thought that this should have been a warning to me, but it passed me by, as they say, without even touching a hair. I had several partners in college, and usually I would be happy to invite a girl into my bed on the first date, or even earlier if I could. But now I was looking for a life partner and didn't want sex to cloud my mind. She, on the other hand, saw sex as just one part of a relationship. I have never met such a sweet and thoughtful guy. It seems like I wasted a lot of time on others. She kissed me on the cheek and went home. As I drove back to my apartment, I thought about who she was. First of all, she was beautiful. Tall, 5'9", I was 6, weighed 175 pounds, about 130 pounds and very curvy. Green eyes, long brown hair, and beautiful lips. She was also smart and witty. We had common interests. It seemed like it was a marriage destined by heaven. On the way home, I decided that I would marry her. We only had 3 or 4 dates before we decided to be an exclusive couple. Christmas was approaching, and we both wanted to introduce each other to our parents. We couldn't decide where to go, so we cast lots. We went to her family from December 24th to 30, and to mine from December 31st to January 6th, when we had to return to the university. I enjoyed meeting her parents, who immediately fell in love with me. Molly had a younger brother, Mike, and we got along well too. She was from Phoenix, and it was nice to enjoy nice weather the entire trip. We met with her old friends, relatives, and it was a wonderful time. At noon on the 30th, we left for Chicago, and then took a short flight to the Quad City where we rented a car and drove to Rivertown. My parents also fell in love with Molly. She was everything that future relatives could dream of. My mom and dad were the only children in their families, so our family was small, just the six, as they called themselves. Mom, dad, and their brothers and wives. We had a great time. By the 3rd of January, everyone was back at work. We still had a couple more days to explore my hometown while everyone was busy. We drove past Atherton Manufacturing, and Molly saw that there were a lot of different vans and trucks parked in the parking lot, and she asked me what the company did. I described it as a great little firm. They take standard vans and trucks of various sizes and turn them into mobile restaurants or trucks for specialized businesses such as computer repairs, curtain fitting, etc. Business has boomed, especially with the rise of online sales. Molly majored in engineering product development, which really interested her. An endless number of possibilities opened up for the creation, design, and production of new products. "I want to work there," she exclaimed enthusiastically. I have rarely heard such delight in her voice. "I'm sure my dad or one of my uncles can arrange an interview for you. Uncle Bill is a lawyer. He deals with everyone, and Uncle George works for Dumbarton, but I'm sure he has the right connections." What is Dumbarton? This is the largest employer in Rivertown. They produce chemical products. Some are sold under their own brand, but most are contracts manufactured for large chemical companies. Oh, I see. She was not at all interested in this. She was already thinking about how to get a job at Atherton. We were driving back to my parents' house and saw the 4-story Dumbarton headquarters building. "Do you think Uncle George is there now?" she asked. "I think yes. He is the vice president of purchasing. Let's go see him." This trip to George Smith, my father's only brother, set off a whole chain of events. George knew all the Atherton executives through the golf club. In addition, Atherton was a major customer of Dumbarton products. George convinced Atherton to use local cleaners, degreasers, and detergents, which he could offer at competitive prices as delivery cost next to nothing. Everyone was happy. George easily arranged for Molly to have a morning meeting with the general manager of Atherton. Greg Atherton, grandson of the company's founder and current president and CEO, loved showing off his business. He was in his mid-40s and was involved in every aspect of his company. He loved his company, its employees, and products. This was the meaning of his life. Molly's enthusiasm fired him up. The more he showed her, the more interested she became, and he wanted to show her even more. By lunchtime, they were quickly exchanging ideas about what they had tried, what they could try, and what they hadn't tried yet. Atherton invited her to start work that day. She was graduating in May, and they agreed on a position and starting salary. "Isn't this wonderful? We will live in your hometown. I love your parents. Greg Atherton is the best boss in the world. Life is wonderful," she said excitedly. I smiled at this whirlwind of enthusiasm. So my first question should have been, how did it go? But I think I can ask the next one straight away. "Since it looks like we'll be living here, do you want to marry me?" She screamed, "Yes," then lightly hit me on the arm and said, "For such a sweet romantic, that was a lousy proposal." But she smiled and was happier than ever. "I was planning on taking you to the jeweler tomorrow to pick out a ring, so I'll try to be more romantic next time." "Maybe you should get a job at Atherton too," she suggested. "No, I always preferred Dumbarton, and I'm sure Uncle George can get me there. I talked to him, and he helped me get a great job." So a chance excursion to a small business brought the two of us a job and a marriage proposal. It was one of the most successful days in the life of any couple. We returned to Brentwood, completed our studies, and began preparing to move to Rivertown. At this time, Molly and her mother were planning a wedding in June, which was to take place in Phoenix. We graduated at the end of May, sold my car, got into hers, and drove to Chicago, where we left her in an airport parking lot and went on a week-long honeymoon to Maui. When we returned, we went to Rivertown and rented our first apartment. We had great jobs, so we chose a 3-room apartment overlooking the river. Already on June 21st, we started working, and our life as a married couple began. I've been waiting in the parking lot for over 30 minutes. Waiting is the worst. Sex with Molly Smith, an engineer and wife, was even better than with Molly Thompson, a student and fiancé. We loved each other passionately, and kisses often led us to the bedroom where we would end the day. Sometimes we started the next day the same way. Sometimes I would come home and find, for example, a jacket with patches on the elbows, a pipe and an oar, and next to it a note. Professor, Molly behaved badly in class again and is awaiting punishment in the bedroom. It was always fun. Role-playing, hot sex, trying things we wouldn't normally do, and then, as if lowering a veil, we returned to ordinary, intimate love. Another time I was greeted by a cowboy hat, boots, and a belt with a toy revolver. The note read, "The teacher is in her room. All the guests are at the city festival. The house is empty. Miss Molly is afraid of guns. Point a gun at her, and she'll do whatever you say." I did so, and she complied. The most memorable incident was when I came home, and although her car was parked, she did not answer my numerous calls. I went into the bedroom. The door was closed. This was uncharacteristic. There was a note on the door. "I'm waiting." This will be fun, I thought as I opened the door. I saw her naked. Her hands were tied to the head of the bed. To this day, I don't know how she managed to tie herself up like that. The appearance of a woman in this position is difficult to describe in words. That evening was incredible. As it turned out, this was another important warning that I missed. We were 25 years old, and I wanted to buy a house. Molly understood that home would also mean family. We were both looking forward to this, but sometimes she joked. It's like a pig and a chicken looking at a village of starving people. The hen offers to give them ham and eggs. The pig says, "Well, for you it's generosity, but for me it's obligation." She loved her job, and during her time there, she went from being Greg Atherton's mentee to becoming something of a mentor to him, helping him find new, innovative solutions. Atherton's business flourished. "How about working from home? I'm sure Greg Atherton would let you do almost anything," I suggested one day. "Don't know. I think it's unlikely. He had a wife, but she did not have a husband. He said they got divorced, and now all his energy is focused on the company. He doesn't see anything else in life." I don't think that's what we want to achieve. No, you're right. This is a meaningless existence. But I'm only 25. We still have time. Let's wait a little. How much is a little? Not now. This is where we stopped. A few months later, we returned to this issue again. When? Molly. Let's have our first child at 28 years old. So, we'll start trying next year. This made me immensely happy. We have taken an important step forward. Our love relationship was back in full force, as were our passionate fantasies in bed. Life was wonderful. We were engrossed in our new careers and each other. We spent a little time with the six, but not too much. We joined a golf club, but we rarely went there, only to meet the required monthly minimum. Mostly we saved money and made love. Our intimate relationship remained as tender and sensual as before and did not fade away. Molly seemed even closer to me. She often showed me how much she loved me. But suddenly the wild sex stopped. One Saturday I walked into the house, and she was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of iced tea. It had been a couple of months since I found her tied up in bed, and I knew how much she loved being taken by force. I grabbed her hand, pulled her, and she screamed for me to stop. I was stunned. I stopped immediately, although I was so confused that I could barely find my voice. "Sorry, you used to love it, and I thought that since we haven't played in so long, you missed it too." "Well, now I don't like it. You can't just take it and use it if you want," she replied sharply. "Take advantage?" Seriously, I was shocked and hurt. My liberated wife suddenly changed. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'll never again." I didn't finish the thought. He turned and went into his office. I spent the rest of the day there just doing little things. "Are you going to have dinner or what?" Her voice interrupted the silence. Those were the first words either of us had spoken in hours. "I'm not too hungry, so I'll probably go with or what." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just a joke. "No thanks, I don't want dinner." She simply turned around and left. Usually, if we spent a Saturday evening at home, we would watch TV, a movie, or something on the History Channel. I left the office, went to the living room, and turned on the TV. Molly was sitting on the couch reading a book, and when the TV started playing, she got up and headed to our bedroom. I turned off the TV. "Molly, what happened?" "I don't know, probably nothing. I don't understand why I'm so angry with you. We used to play like this all the time. But now I don't want it, and it bothers me. I don't want to take it out on you, but I just couldn't help myself." "It's okay, I'm not fragile." "No, it's not normal. Life is changing. I struggle constantly at work and feel like I need the feeling of love and security at home. You love me and give me this feeling. This is exactly what I need from you. By the way, I have an idea. Would you like to make me feel safe now?" With these words, she smiled. I didn't have to ask twice. We quickly found ourselves on the bed. When it was all over, we talked for a long time. After a while, the topics for conversation were exhausted, and I was already falling asleep when I felt her kiss. We made love again and slept through the night. Maybe it's good news Molly hasn't come yet. Everything between us is too beautiful. Perhaps Sue was wrong. Maybe she was jealous. These thoughts made me remember a recent conversation. "Greg wants me to work with the production manager for a while. We need to improve existing products to make them easier to produce. I met the boss today. Interesting woman." "Is the production manager a woman?" I asked in surprise. She laughed. "You don't think women can do this kind of work?" I laughed too. "No, honey, I think women can do whatever they want. Tell me about her." "I just met today. I don't really know anything. She's about my age, blonde, of average height. Her name is Sue Dobson. She's new to this position. Before that, she spent almost all her time at the plant. The new job has taken over Molly. She and Sue often argued, but quickly became close friends. Both were results-oriented, but looked at things from different angles. Surprisingly quickly, they learned to work together, changing processes to make production more efficient without losing functionality. After a few weeks of working together, Molly suggested we go out with Sue and her husband on a Saturday night. I was all for it. We had few friends because we spent all our time at work. We decided to go to the restaurant at the country club, which had a beautiful view of the river. We agreed to meet them in the lobby and enter the restaurant together. Molly and I waited there for a couple of minutes when a couple appeared at the door. "Oh my God, Sue!" Molly exclaimed. "Dave," Sue said in surprise, looking at Molly. "You never said you married Dave Smith." Sue came up to me, and we hugged like brother and sister who hadn't seen each other for years. The husband, who had arrived with Sue, extended his hand. "John Dobson, I take it you already know each other." Molly laughed. "My name is Molly Smith. No, my Dave is just a very outgoing guy. He regularly meets women this way." We all laughed. "Molly, you won't believe this. Dave moved across the street from me when I was 9. He became the little brother I never had," Sue said. We sat down at the table and started discussing our childhood in Rivertown. Sue and I chatted while Molly and John listened politely, but without much enthusiasm. "If you were so close, why did you lose touch?" asked Molly. I looked at her, surprised by the question. I didn't remember the exact reason then. It was probably a childhood friendship. The difference of 1 year seemed huge then. Older girls don't hang out with younger boys. We never thought of each other as a boy and a girl. Sue laughed. "Almost never." I looked at her, not understanding what she was talking about. "When my parents went away for the weekend and I was home alone," she continued, glancing at me briefly, I suddenly understood what she meant. "My little brother wanted to come and play, but when he took off his shirt, I saw a handsome guy in front of me, and I promised not to accept boys while my parents were away, and suddenly he became the boy who had to leave." After that, Sue and I both laughed. After that, he started dating girls. I never seriously thought about dating a junior in high school. Girls don't do that. We remained friends, good friends, but our paths crossed less and less, Sue added. I left school a year before Dave and didn't know what I wanted to do, so my dad, the production manager at Atherton, got me a part-time job there while I was in college. I met John in college, and we knew we were serious from the very beginning. Have you taken over your father's position? I asked with a smile, although I wondered why my family never mentioned her. This thought flashed through my head. I didn't ask questions about her, and our parents were never particularly close, for reasons I didn't care about at the time. The thought disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Yes, I did. He's very proud. He retired after 30 years of work, although he enjoyed his work. Now he and his mother live in Florida, close to her family. As he says, he still has a family member in the industry. The evening was great and marked the beginning of a strong friendship. The four of us became inseparable, as they say. Only 2 minutes passed. Time seemed to slow down. All I can do is wait. I started to worry. Molly wasn't being honest. We just had a fight. She promised that as soon as she completed the project, we would start looking for a house and having children. She returned home beaming at how well her project presentation had gone. I said I would call the realtor. She looked at me and said, I told you after this project I'm working on now. I wrote down the date of her last promise. This caused a quarrel. Why don't you believe me? She shouted. Why aren't you trustworthy? I answered. We argued again and again. This has become commonplace. Yesterday, the secretary called me on the intercom. Mr. Smith, Sue Dobson has come to see you. She says she doesn't have an appointment. Certainly, let him come in. We exchanged greetings and a kiss on the cheek, and then she sat down, clearly nervous. I don't know how to say this, so I'll say it directly. Molly is acting strange. I'm sure she's going to have an affair. I wish I could say it was a shock. I don't know what's wrong, but I know something is definitely wrong. We have a supplier of paint and varnish materials. I will say this. This guy is simply handsome. 6'3" or 4", strong, probably weighs 225 pounds, all muscle. I think he used to play football before he got injured. He is confident and uses his charm on everyone. Molly became interested in him. Do you know that she's already cheating, or is she just about to? No, I don't know for sure, but I heard their conversation. I was supposed to meet her at her office. She went to the door and heard him say to her, Pines Motel, you are a woman of easy virtue. He called her a woman of easy virtue right to her face, and she just giggled. I heard her ask something about Pines, and I stepped back and waited another minute or two until he came out. He looked at me and immediately turned away. We don't have the best history. I went into her office and asked, What are you doing? She simply replied, He's such a villain, isn't he? When was this? 20 minutes ago. I tried to tell her that she couldn't be with him. She looked me straight in the eyes and said she wasn't. He just loved to flirt. I left her and came here. The Pines has that reputation. Did she say what time? No, just something about tomorrow afternoon. That's all I heard. She has started lying, so it will be useless to talk to her today. Like with you, she will simply deny everything. I'll wait in the parking lot of the cafe nearby. There's a hole in the fence between them, probably so people can get from the motel to the cafe. Wow, you seem to know this place well. Not really, but like I said, it's a popular place. I have a friend who sometimes patrols from the cafe's parking lot himself. You're a good friend, Sue. Hopefully the shock of seeing me out front will put her back on track. Do you think this is the first time? I don't know why I repeated the question. I was probably hoping to hear an answer. I think yes. Mr. Atherton and I handle all paint purchases. That's how I found myself in someone else's car in front of the Pines Motel on a Wednesday afternoon. I arrived at 11:30. I didn't want to miss the chance to stop her. I didn't want to shame her after. I wanted to stop her before. It was approaching 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was still waiting. A few minutes later, my wife's blue BMW appeared around the corner, drove past the office, and parked opposite number 5. There were no other cars in the motel. She was alone in the car and just sat there. She was looking at the motel, so I got out of the car. I was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and big sunglasses, and unless she looked straight at me, I didn't think she'd recognize me. I walked toward the gap in the fence, and just then a Chevy Impala pulled up and parked next to her car. A tall, strong man quickly got out of the Impala. Molly was getting out of her BMW. I walked towards them, but I could have had a neon sign and a drum, they still wouldn't have noticed. Their eyes were only on each other. They met in front of her car, she extended her hand to him, and he said something. She quickly pulled her hands back, pushing her chest forward. I said, "Sorry," I took off my glasses and hat. The glasses were in my jacket pocket, and I just dropped my hat. He turned and looked at me. "Are you having problems?" It was more of a growl than a question. "The girl is my wife," I said without much emotion. "Maybe, but I'm going to get it now." "Molly, please let's go home." Molly just stood there. I think she was in shock. She didn't answer or acknowledge me or him. "Get away from us, and everything will be fine." "I can't do that, I'm sorry, but I'm taking my wife home." I raised my voice and moved towards her, moving around him. "Well, I guess that's it." He turned his back to me and pretended to walk back to his car. I took another step, and suddenly he turned around. I woke up in a hospital room with enrollment 4 in my arm and bandages on my face. I tried to sit up, but realized that everything hurt. I found the call button and pressed it. It took some time before anyone appeared. A businesslike nurse came in and said, "You have returned to us. I'll call the doctor now. This may take time, and we are short-staffed on Sunday nights." I tried to say, "Today is Sunday," but all that came out of my mouth was a wheeze. "If I understand you correctly, yes, now." She looked at her wrist. 3 o'clock in the morning, Sunday. You were brought in on Wednesday afternoon, if I'm not mistaken. You were beaten badly." "My wife," I wheezed. "She was here almost the whole time. I think I left for the first time a couple of hours ago." "What?" "I think that's enough for today. Rest. I will inform everyone that you have returned to us." She pressed the button on the Roman 4, and the world suddenly disappeared. When I woke up again, it was light. There were people milling around, and a middle-aged, balding man looked at me and said, "Mr. Smith, can you hear me?" I opened my eyes and nodded. "My name is Dr. Michaels. I'm a neurologist. Can you squeeze my fingers?" He placed 2 fingers in my palm. I squeezed. He pricked me with a sharp object and touched me in different places. Finally, he said, "I am pleased you will fully recover." "Then I'm happy too." My voice seemed to be recovering. "Are you strong enough to be questioned by the police, Mr. Smith?" "I wonder how much strength it takes." "You were unconscious for a long time. Answering questions can be tiring. If you get tired, tell him. I've already told him that if you say you're tired, he should stop." "Agreed." "Of course, where is my wife?" "She's here, but the detective asked to talk to you first." "Well, then let him come in." It seemed strange. Why can't I just say hello to Molly? Why can't she be with me during the interrogation? But everything was a little strange. Maybe I wasn't thinking clearly yet. "Mr. Smith, my name is Lake, Detective Lake. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" It was a rhetorical question. I simply nodded, and he continued, "Do you remember how you ended up here, Mr. Smith?" When he asked, I didn't know for a moment. I thought, and the memories came flooding back. I was at the Pines Motel, waiting for my wife and her potential lover. They arrived, I tried to talk to her, but she seemed to withdraw. I told her friend, a big, strong man whom I had never seen before, that I was not going to give up my wife. He seemed to walk backwards, but then he turned around and hit me. From that moment on, I don't remember anything. This man, one Ray Harrison, claims that you hit him first. I don't know his name, but I can guarantee that I didn't hit him, unless I can't hit him while in a coma. Have you and your wife had problems? My wife? What did she say? She's here. Let me ask questions, Mr. Smith. I promise I want to do the right thing. There is conflicting information, so it's my job to find out the truth. I do my job well. Did you and your wife have problems? Not like that, I mean, not with other men, at least that I know of. Our good friend Sue Dobson came to me yesterday, the day before yesterday, when they were supposed to meet, and said that Molly was dating this guy. She said it was the first time. Lake asked me about Sue and gathered enough information to go and question her. He asked the questions in different ways several times and made sure that the first time I thought about the other man was when Sue told me, and that I decided to meet them there because I was afraid Molly wouldn't tell me the truth. He thanked me and left. Molly must have been standing by the door because she burst into the room almost the second the detective left. "Oh my God, Dave, I was so worried. I'm so sorry. I don't know how I got you into this." She finished speaking and began to sob. She was in tears. "Why, Molly?" "You know why? I'm not making excuses, but he influenced me so badly that I seemed to go crazy. I thought our love had driven away my need for rough sex, but he was like catnip. I'm so sorry. Luckily, you stopped us, but look what happened to you because of my stupidity. Can you forgive me? You were right there. Couldn't you stop him?" "Dave, I'm so ashamed. I just shut down. I think it was a panic attack. So I agreed to meet a man for the first time in our entire marriage, and you were there to catch me. I just froze. Police say he said I hit him first. What did you tell them?" "Dave, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I saw you, and then you were on the ground. I called 911, and the police and ambulance came pretty quickly after that." I looked at her. That was the story. I was sure of it. Why can't she be honest anymore? Suddenly, I felt tired. No, worse, I was exhausted. "Call the nurse. I don't feel well." She quickly jumped out of the room, and I again sank into unconsciousness. I woke up again, and it was dark. There was no one in the room. I pressed the call button, and the nurse returned. "What time is it now? What time is it?" What was that question? Am I losing my mind? "It's Sunday night, Mr. Smith. You've only slept for a few hours. The doctor asked me to find out if meeting your wife is causing you any anxiety." Yes, I did. It was wearing me out. I felt pretty good when she arrived, but after a few minutes, it felt like all the air had been let out of me. Why is this important? "In a couple of days, you will be discharged from here. Do you want to go home? My parents, were they here?" "Yes, but your mother asked so many questions that your father said she was driving us and herself crazy. He added that you don't need visitors unless you ask. We have to call them when you ask." "What time is it?" She looked at her watch and said, 11:30. "Call them right now. I want to talk to them." She looked at my card and dialed the number on the phone in the room. She handed the phone to me. "It's calling." "Hi, Dad." I listened. "Well, it could have been better. Listen, when I get discharged from here, I want to live with you for a few days. Molly isn't telling the truth about what happened, and I don't want to put pressure on her to finally accept her guilt. Thank you." My father handed the phone to my mother, who needed to hear my voice and know that I was getting better. She burst into tears and was glad that she could look after me while I recovered. On my last day in the hospital, Victor Garland came to see me. Mr. Garland was an assistant district attorney. He wanted to talk to me about the results of their investigation. He said they were going to arrest Mr. Harrison for grievous bodily harm, battery, and a number of other lesser offenses. He said that because Harrison was previously a law-abiding citizen, he would be released on bail after being charged. The trial will take place in 3 months. I asked him about the conflicting testimony and how my wife claimed she didn't see anything. He looked at me and said that he wanted to trust me with something important. He explained the case, the difficulties he was facing, and what he wanted me to do. I thought about it and agreed. Yes, I can do this. But it turned out that I couldn't. I stayed with my parents for almost 2 weeks. I asked that Molly only visit me during the day, stay for dinner, and then leave. She did this without objection. We discussed everything, but we didn't talk too much or too often about that day. I believed her when she said she was confused about her sexuality. She saw me as her safe haven and needed my love. She said she realized she also longed to be taken. I could play with her, but my nature was not aggressive enough. She was like a ticking bomb waiting for the aggressive Mr. Harrison, and I saved her. She sincerely regretted what she had done. This was no one's fault but hers. I kept telling her that it was not she who dealt the mean blow to me. She began to sob uncontrollably. The tears were real, but I couldn't believe her emotions. She couldn't be so devoted to Harrison that she would protect him with lies. But so far she has done it, or perhaps she just couldn't remember until now. I stayed with my parents for a month and was ready to go back to work. Molly and I decided it was a good time for me to move back to our apartment. I still wasn't sure where my connection to her was. Molly was sorry and promised to be faithful in the future, but her actions that day and before that day were still something she couldn't come to terms with. She agreed to family therapy. During the time leading up to Harrison's trial, Molly became more and more stressed. She became completely immersed in her work, and our family life suffered. Our sex life has almost disappeared. Since I got home, I slept in the guest bedroom, and every now and then Molly would sneak into my room at night, and we would make love tenderly. We started therapy and had some success. However, the elephant in the room Harrison still remained an unresolved problem. But it became obvious to both of us that I would take her back. Our love could survive one almost perfect mistake. The night before the trial, Molly came to me and said she needed to talk to me. I have to testify, Mr. Garland is going to call me first. I thought you still couldn't remember anything. I can't, but he said I should still perform. Molly, I'll just say this once. Your denials are unconvincing. Garland thinks you'll tell the truth at trial. If you don't tell the truth, he will turn against you. Please be careful and honest. I promised Assistant District Attorney Garland that I wouldn't warn her of his intentions, but I just couldn't help myself. I've never been to court before. It's not at all what they show on TV, I can assure you. Harrison had a good lawyer. Before the start of the case, they filed petitions on one issue and argued on another. Everything was settled. Who won and who lost remained a mystery to me. The jury was then sworn in. The prosecutor stood to make his opening statement. He explained to the jury how I had been brutally beaten by a man who was so cowardly that he gave me a mean blow and kicked me repeatedly while I was unconscious. He described the dirty date and explained in detail how it all happened. He then outlined the crimes Harrison was accused of and how he intended to prove those crimes. When he finished, I was sure Harrison was going to jail for a long time. Harrison's lawyer then stood up. He said he didn't understand why we were here. Mr. Harrison, of course, admits that Mrs. Smith showed interest in him, and he is ashamed that he succumbed to the charms of this beautiful woman. He arrived at the motel, she had already rented a room, and suddenly this man screamed at him and attacked him. Of course, he defended himself. Mr. Harrison grew up in difficult circumstances and was never given a chance. He was born into poverty and lived in terrible conditions. His father was cruel. He rose above it and received a scholarship to college. He played football and made it to the NFL, but he never made it to the first game of the regular season. He was seriously injured, and his career ended before it even began. He did everything he could. He had a good job. He was a model citizen until this woman, he pronounced the word as if it were not a gender designation or diagnosis, captivated him. He was alarmed and was ready to cheat with a married woman. Suddenly, he was attacked, and he defended himself as the streets had taught him. He was sorry that he had hurt Mr. Smith, but he couldn't help it. Smith attacked him and paid for it. When the lawyer finished, I was surprised that I was not in the dock. The prosecutor's office began presenting its evidence. The first witness was Molly. Molly stepped up to the podium. Garland asked her questions about that day, and she fidgeted and squirmed, but eventually said she was shocked when I said, "I'm sorry." She said she had never experienced anything like this before and just froze. I relaxed. I believed she was going to tell the truth. She burst into tears. It was a good performance, but it seemed to me that it was just an act for the audience. I started to get nervous. She was asked if she remembered what happened after that. She said no, not really. Everything was like a fog. Do you remember when your husband said, "This is my wife"? Oh yes, I remember. And then Mr. Harrison said, "Excuse me," but he said, "She's mine for sex." Why would he say that? We were about to go into the room. She burst into tears again. This time, it seemed to me, more sincerely. To the room you rented, correct? He set everything up on purpose. Who? Mr. Harrison. My husband is so caring and kind to me, and Mr. Harrison was the complete opposite. It triggered something in me, and I gave in to it. He told me to meet him at a dirty motel, and I just agreed. He said that he would arrange everything and I should take the key. I went in, but nothing was organized. He just wanted me to humiliate myself, and I did it. I'm terribly ashamed, but that's exactly what I did. So, after that verbal exchange, do you remember what happened? Not really. Well, I think so. Yes, I remember. Dave got angry and hit Ray. I almost jumped to my feet, then suddenly sat up straight, and then went limp again. I thought my world had collapsed. I was sure the jury was looking at me. I wonder if they saw my reaction as shock at her lies or as resignation that I had been caught in a lie. I passed out. Garland asked questions and reformulated them in different ways, but she sobbed and stood her ground. I struck first. I remember he asked her one last question. "Mrs. Smith, what if I told you that the motel had a working security camera?" Molly calmly replied, "That would be great, they are." Garland completed his questioning, but Williams' lawyer asked that cross-examination be postponed until the defense presented its evidence. The judge granted his request, and a 30-minute break was announced. Garland took me to the conference room. Garland began. To say I'm shocked is an understatement. I was sure she would tell the truth. How are you going to prove the case now? His black eye is not from a punch, but from being hit by a car fender. We have DNA and evidence. The hospital examined your hands while you were in a coma, no bruises, nothing. You didn't hit anyone. We also have some bad camera footage. What's wrong with her? The camera had to scan, showing the central numbers all the time and alternately capturing the numbers from the edges. But the scanning motor burned out or something like that. The camera was at the end of the building and showed only numbers 8 through 12. She parked opposite the 5th one, and he parked opposite the 6th one. If he hadn't kicked you so hard you ended up in front of the 8th man, we wouldn't have had anything. I will get a guilty verdict. But now that I do this, I will go after her too. It pains me to admit it, but I still care about her. At the same time, we are done with her. If she has to go to jail, then so be it. I saw Molly as I left the meeting room. I asked her not to be in our apartment from 5 to 7 o'clock. I'll take my things and go back to live with my parents. She tried to talk. I said we have nothing more to discuss. She hung her head and said she wouldn't be there while I was there. We returned to the courtroom. I was the next witness. You have already taken the oath, Mr. Smith. Are you ready to answer questions honestly? Garland's opening line struck a chord with me. I don't understand. This offends me. Of course, I will answer honestly. Why are you asking this? I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. Mr. Harrison's lawyer presented a completely different version of your beating, and I want the jury to look at people's honesty. I object. Harrison's lawyer stood up, blushing, and he protested loudly. The judge looked at him with a straight face. Mr. Williams, I understand that you have an objection. On what grounds? The prosecutor is testifying, Your Honor. It's not enough that he's trying to convict an unfortunate citizen on false grounds, but now he's testifying to influence the jury. So are you, Mr. Williams. Let me remind both sides. You're here to question the witnesses, the jury is here to listen to their answers, and I'm here to make sure everyone follows the rules, which you don't seem to be doing very well right now. Therefore, I support the objection. Mr. Garland, ask your witness questions and let him answer. Mr. Williams, when I ask for a rationale for an objection, state it. I don't want to hear your testimony. Is everyone clear? Judging by the expressions on your faces, you are both equally unhappy, and that makes me happy. Let's continue. Garland started asking questions about who I was, where I worked, and then we started talking about my marriage. Did we have a good marriage? Did I suspect my wife of cheating? Finally, he came to the question of the day on which the skirmish took place. Can you describe what happened when you saw your wife get out of the car? The accused was also getting out of his car. He walked to the front of his car and turned left to meet her in front of her car. I walked out into the parking lot of the Pines Motel and walked up to the right of his car. None of them noticed me. They were talking. Continue. I made myself known. I think I just said, sorry. He turned and gave me a look full of contempt. My wife just stood there. She didn't say anything, didn't scream, and basically didn't do anything. She just looked shocked. I said that she is my wife, and he replied that now she is his. Excuse me, Mr. Smith, did you accurately convey his words? Well, not really. I didn't think it would be appropriate. Mr. Smith, we need to reconstruct the events as accurately as possible. So what exactly did he say? He said she might be my wife, but the sex is his. Continue. I told him I wasn't going to give up on my wife just because he said so. He said, well, I guess that's it, and he turned around, took a step, and then suddenly turned around and hit me. I woke up in the hospital. Garland looked at Williams' lawyer. Your witness. Losing a wife to another man is humiliating, isn't it, Mr. Smith? Don't know. Remembering that day, maybe the details are a little blurry. Still, you lost consciousness. He looked at the jury as if losing consciousness meant losing his mind. Isn't it more plausible that you saw your wife in the arms of another man and screamed, "Get away from her, you bastard"? I didn't say anything like that. Everything happened exactly as I described. Then, to make matters worse, your wife said, "Leave me, I'm with a better man now." No, like I said, she didn't say a word. And then, in a fit of rage, you hit my client, didn't you? No, quite the opposite. He hit me on the sly. You know what perjury is, don't you? I object. Pressure on the witness. Accepted. Are you sure, Mr. Smith? You claim you never hit my client, but he had a black eye. Can you explain this? No, I didn't like this answer, but Garland clearly told me to answer yes or no to all questions if possible. I could, so I answered. Did he have a black eye when you asked him, as you put it, not to give up on his wife because he said so? Did he have a bruise then? As far as I remember, no. Are you unsure of your recollection, or did he really not have a bruise? Damn, damn, damn. Answer yes or no, idiot. He didn't have a bruise. And you remember this clearly? Yes. Well then, despite what anyone said, you had this fight and he had a black eye, right? No. Well, he didn't have a bruise before the fight. That's what you said. We didn't fight. Please don't interrupt me, Mr. Smith. I haven't asked the question yet. He didn't ask a question, but grinned brazenly. He didn't have a bruise before the fight, but he did after. How do you explain this? He hit me on the sly and knocked me out. He didn't have a black eye when he hit me. You say that he got it after. I'll take your words on faith. You mean you didn't know he had a black eye? He knocked me out with one punch. I woke up after a coma in the hospital. I saw him again today. Now he doesn't have a black eye. When could I confirm the presence of this black eye? I had a blast with him. Why would he ask me such a question? Then he started asking more questions. He claimed that Harrison said that I was not a man at all, and that this supposedly made me angry. No, now you are making up a different story. Everything happened as I said. What other story? I don't understand. I'm sorry, sir, but you understand perfectly well. You want me to repeat your last set of false questions so that the jury will be confused about what I said and what you said. I just said, It was my wife. He said it was his sex. I said I wouldn't give it away just because he said so. He hit me. This is a fact. He repeated this 3 or 4 times, thinking about what he said or what Molly said and what I did and how the fight started. I knew better than to get involved and just went back to my original statement. When he finished, Garland stood up and said he had questions on the interception. Mr. Smith, Mr. Williams has offered so many different theories about what could have happened. Could you refresh my memory and tell me what really happened that day? I protest. The question has already been asked and answered. Accepted. Mr. Smith's version of what happened is clear enough, I think. Your Honor, what does his version mean? You have no reason to doubt his testimony. The judge looked unhappy. He paused and turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say a few words. My statement was completely neutral. My job is not to decide whether Mr. Smith told the truth or not. That's your job. I could say Mr. Smith's account of what happened. He testified. It's your job to determine whether he was being completely honest, completely dishonest, or somewhere in between those extremes. There will be more witnesses. When everyone has finished their testimony, the lawyers will make their closing arguments, and then you will have to decide what happened and whether any laws were broken. Is it clear? He examined the jury carefully and made sure they understood. He then looked at Garland and said, Mr. Garland, does this satisfy your doubts? He stared at him until Garland admitted that he was satisfied. I think that's enough for today. It's almost 3:30, and I'm afraid that we won't have time to conduct direct and cross-examination in the remaining time. Mr. Garland, we will hear your next witness tomorrow at 9 and the court is closed. On the second day, the trial continued. Garland showed video from the motel. It was short, but it showed Harrison's rage and anger, which was extremely judgmental for him. The video did not show the start of the fight. There was no cross-examination. Garland then called a forensic expert from Chicago to testify about Harrison's eye. Photographs showed he had a severe black eye, but the expert said the wound could not have been caused by a punch as there were no knuckle marks on it. It was also concentrated on the cheek below the eye and diminished on both sides. This was consistent with hitting a curved surface, such as the fender of Harrison's car. The expert explained that he took a sample from the front fender of Harrison's car near the headlight and found his DNA. There was a dent in the fender made by Harrison's face. The expert made it clear that Harrison deliberately hit his face on his wing to make it appear that he was in a fight. Williams did an excellent job on cross-examination, pointing out that the expert never saw Harrison's injury in person, only in photos, and that the dent in the fender could have been from his buttocks while he was sitting on the car, and the DNA could have come from being waxed. Garland was sure, but I wasn't so sure. We adjourned the meeting to the second day. The third day began with Mr. Garland said, I call Dwight Reynolds. I protest, Your Honor, this is a complete surprise. Mr. Reynolds is not on the list of witnesses provided by Mr. Garland, the defense lawyer said. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I didn't know Mr. Reynolds had anything to do with this case. If I may ask a few introductory questions, I am confident that you will allow his testimony. I allow questions, but only about how he ended up here. No questions about the incident, do you understand me? The judge's gaze could have wilted flowers. I'm sure Garland understood everything. Mr. Reynolds explained to the court when you and I first met. I saw your picture in the newspaper, so I knew who you were. I learned that the process starts at 9 a.m., so I arrived here around 8:30. Excuse me, Mr. Reynolds, what day did you arrive here? Oh, today. I just met you today. Why was it important that we meet today? Because of what she said. This woman, she. Sorry again, Mr. Reynolds. The judge asked not to talk about details yet. Is it correct to say that you believe that you have something important that can help? Well, yes, as I already told you. Not now. Please let me ask you, have you been previously questioned by the police, lawyers, or anyone else? No, as I already told you. Mr. Reynolds, I'm sure you want to say what you want to say, but please be patient. Why did you decide to get in touch today and not earlier? I'm ashamed of this. I guess I just didn't want to get involved in it. I saw that they had arrested the guy and that he was going to be tried, so I thought it was okay. He will get what? Stop. That's enough for now. Your Honor, it is obvious that Mr. Reynolds was not known to the prosecution. His testimony will be useful. I ask that it be allowed to be heard. Mr. Williams, the judge turned to the defense lawyer. My protest remains, Your Honor. This man appears here suddenly when the defense has failed to prove its case, and there is no telling what he is going to say. This is inappropriate, untimely, and irrelevant, and the defense strongly objects. We'll see if it makes a difference. I permit the testimony to be heard to determine its relevance. Garland asked Reynolds how he got involved in the case. He explained that he had come to have lunch at the diner, as usual. He arrived at about 11:30 and the parking lot was full, so he had to drive around and park next to the Pines Motel. He saw some guy just sitting in the car, staring ahead. He wondered why. Then he remembered that he had business at the post office, so he turned around and went to the post office. About half an hour later, he returned and found a good parking spot closer to the road, near a diner. When he walked in, he saw the same car again and the same guy still sitting there. He had lunch, and when he came out, the guy was just getting out of the car. He saw this guy walk towards a couple of large, well-built man and a beautiful red-haired woman. They apparently stopped talking and looked at him. The guy in the car started walking towards them, and the other man seemed to turn to leave, but then turned around and hit him with a right hook, sending him flying. At this point, Garland interrupted. You say he was a large, well-built man. Do you recognize him here today? No, not really. That person at the table over there might be him, but I was quite far away. Your memories seem very clear. How is this possible? I recorded everything on my phone. I protest. Your Honor, that's enough. This man claims to have seen something at the Pines Motel, but cannot identify my client, and now wants to present a long-distance video that shows nothing. I think we'll know what it shows after we watch it. We'll watch it in the judge's office first. The two lawyers, the technician, and the judge retired to the judge's office. 20 minutes passed, and they returned. The court is returning to order. Mr. Williams, do you still wish to object to the showing of this video? Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, I object. This is a surprise, unconfirmed, untimely, and irrelevant. Your protest is rejected. The judge nodded to the technician who was working on connecting the phone to the large television. When you are ready, please show the video to the jury. The video was filmed on a phone. It was vertical rather than horizontal and showed a narrow view of the Pines Motel. It showed me walking towards them wearing a hat and glasses. While Harrison was talking, I took off my glasses and hat. I could see the hat falling into the parking lot, not in an aggressive way, as if I was preparing for a fight, but more as if I had lost the desire to hold it. Harrison stopped and looked at me. Molly continued to stand as before, facing him, but he approached me. You could tell I had said something, although all that could be heard was the noise from the highway 20 feet away from Reynolds, and we were 200 feet further. Harrison could be seen saying something, then apparently I said something too, because I was walking towards him, my back to the camera. All this time Molly stood motionless, without emotion on her face. Harrison turned halfway, then turned again with his right hand and hit me. Molly still stood motionless. It was creepy. Harrison looked at her and stopped his short but destructive attack on me. He walked over to his car and did something like a one-armed push-up on the fender, next to the headlight. Then he simply let his hand slide off the wing and fell face first onto that wing. He shook Molly, rummaged through her purse and found her phone, dialed the number and handed it to her. I believe it was her call to 911. She ended the call and he started talking to her again. The video has ended. Reynolds said he simply got into his car and drove away at that point. Williams remained calm, as if we had just watched a couple of minutes of a daytime show and asked for a 24-hour break in light of the new evidence. The judge granted his request. It was Thursday, and the trial resumed on Monday morning. I stood up and turned to leave. I saw Sue sitting in the back and leaving the courtroom. Molly called and contacted my mother on Saturday morning. She asked to speak to me and was persistent enough to convince my mom to hand over the phone. "What is it, Molly?" "I need you to listen to me for at least a minute. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not asking you to come back, but I want you to understand one thing." "Okay, spit it out." "You are not very sincere, but I deserve it. I passed out when you came and found us. I don't know why or what it was, but it was as if I was paralyzed, like in a dream. Suddenly Ray shook me, and I came to my senses. He even dialed 911 for me and told me to call the police and an ambulance. I did it. And then he told me you hit him, and he went completely crazy. He was going to jail if I didn't tell the police what I saw. I thought he was telling the truth." "Bullshit, Molly. The past lies didn't work, so now you come up with new ones. It was so hard for me to witness that you hit him. I really thought you did it. I would never have done this if I didn't think so. I hope he goes to jail forever. I'm so sorry. She passed out. Well, damn it. I thought about it, and her story actually matched the video. Maybe there was at least a drop of truth in her words. I decided to at least tell Garland about it and see what he wanted to do with the information. I called him at home and left a message for him to meet me at 8 a.m. on Monday in his office. We met. He started talking as if he wanted to tell me something. I asked him to listen to my important news. I told him in detail about Molly's call. He shook his head. "Late, and it's short by more than $1. Why?" "This video changed everything. An aggravated felony is a sure thing. I might even get a charge of attempted murder. They are scared to death. They now claim that it was a long-standing affair and your wife wanted you to be hurt, maybe even killed." She provoked him, knowing his temper. "Do you believe this? You are, of course, a romantic. This cannot be taken away from you. She lied to you, she lied in the courtroom, her lies were exposed in front of everyone, and now she's calling you with a new story. You peck at it like an egg from a high nest. What if she's telling the truth? I don't know, probably then the earth will stop rotating and the sun will fall out of the sky. But this can happen. Her story matches the video. Dave, get your head out of your ass. Of course, her story matches the video. Someone warned her that there was nothing in the first video that would refute her lie. And then the second video comes out and there's a new lie. She's your wife, I understand that. But I see things like this all the time. Her story will change 10 more times, you can rest assured. Let me warn you, she's being arrested right now on charges of various conspiracies, including the attempted murder of Dave Smith. I inhaled sharply. I warned her to tell the truth. I hope this is now true. You saw the same video as me. You saw that she was paralyzed with fear, I would say. Do you think it was because she was caught cheating for the first time in her life? Come on. I thought about that too. But when you asked her about the security camera footage, she seemed to really want it to be shown. I wanted it too much. Someone hinted to her that there was nothing in the first video that contradicted her lie. And then bam, a second video and a new lie. You will hear more from her, and perhaps more than once. She's trying to take full advantage of you. Consider this a Miranda warning. I am the prosecutor on this case. If you want her words to be used against her, give them to me. He looked into my eyes. She looked into my eyes and lied. I want her to go to jail. Well, I want everything to happen according to the facts. Let it ride. Dave, you are naive if you believe this. You want her to be as innocent as you want her to be, and then a fairy tale ending where you get your wife and your old life back. This won't happen. Let me tell you a story. Your wife and her new lover live in perfect harmony. She decides it's time to move on from being a boring engineer. She hints to her friend Sue that she is thinking about getting into bed with a paint salesman. She knows that Sue will tell you about this, and you will try to prevent it. She feeds Ray stories about how you are a dangerous psycho. You show up and her lover uses you like a soccer ball while she pretends to be paralyzed. We will have a messy divorce. Wouldn't it be easier to just hire a lawyer? Dave, you were one step away from a better world. She just stood there. She didn't say, "Oh, Ray, don't touch your poor husband." He even had to dial 911 for her himself. You're telling a dark story. Crap, my name is Ray Harrison. This is perhaps the saddest story you have ever heard. She's so sad because I'm completely screwed, and none of this is my fault. I'm sitting here waiting for my lawyer. I paid him a fortune because I got into trouble with a woman of easy virtue who turned out to be too accessible. It's not my fault. But she stood on the podium and lied. Maybe this will be my salvation. If my lawyer is good, he uses it. I grew up in Philadelphia. I was a tough guy. Tough because he was always larger than his peers and naturally strong. I was a good student. I needed to get good grades if I wanted to get into a prestigious university on a scholarship. I had solid talent, although I was a little slow. I needed to be an excellent student so that the school could offer me an academic scholarship. I got good grades and a scholarship. I played defensive lineman at a mid-major university. I was tough, a great tackler, and by my senior year, I was an All-American. I graduated and was drafted in the 5th round by the Eagles as an outside defensive lineman. Despite my progress, I was told that I was too slow. At the very first training sessions at the beginner's camp, I needed to demonstrate my abilities. During one play, the opponents decided to attack on the flank, where I was standing, and I literally swept away the runner. The offlaners were unhappy with my shot, and in the next play, I was sandwiched between the guard and the tackle. This pissed me off. I started waving my fists. I hit a 335-pound tackle right in the jaw. He wasn't impressed. I lost the fight and was kicked off the team. Well, to be honest, there was more to it than that. After the fight, the coach said that I had to improve, otherwise I would have to leave. I told him it wasn't my fault. He just shook his head and said that the report about me was accurate. I was slow, didn't give it my all, and refused to admit I was at fault for anything. He said he liked my hard hitting. If I wanted to become an important player in the team, I would need to play like this all the time, and I would have to learn to control my aggression when the attack rewarded me for my efforts. I had already been drug tested, so I added steroids to my training regimen to increase my aggression, strength, and speed. Who knew I would be tested again? Obviously, it wasn't my fault. This led me to sales. I was good at it, but there was always this anger burning deep inside. It wasn't my fault. Losing a fight got my attention, and then they held a grudge and tested my urine again. I was a victim. My anger has been a blessing and a curse with women. I have never been able to build a long-term relationship with anyone. But I found that many women, especially married ones, found sex with a dominant man unbearable. The formula was simple and common. They created a false image of themselves in front of their husbands. They were tired of this image. All I had to do was remind them a couple of times how bad they could be, and they became mine. Usually we had no more than 6 meetings. They would start to get scared, I would start to get bored, or more often than not, my schedule would fill with new opportunities. Life was very good. The sex was amazing. They didn't need dinners or romance. They were ready for anything. I learned to recognize such women from a distance. It was like hunting on royal grounds. But Molly Smith literally fell into my lap. I accidentally met Greg Atherton at a gas station. Can you imagine? I was his main paint supplier. We were just chatting about this and that. Looks like he wanted to show off. He told me that at the gas station, there were a couple of rooms that were used for hard sexual pleasures. He said that his girlfriend, although he didn't call her that, was a wild little thing. But he didn't say who she was. He said that to get a room, you just have to say you're Scott Abbott, leave a $500 deposit, use the room, and wait for them to check for damage, and then give you back your $350 deposit. I asked him why they would mistake me for Scott Abbott, since he and I are not that similar. He laughed. The receptionist knows me by my real name, but I always register as Abbott. To be an Abbott, you need to show a valid ID, which costs 500. Give them cash and you're Abbott. We were talking, and then some woman came up to him with an envelope, handed it to him, thanked him, and left. He opened the envelope and took out $300 bills, two 20s, and a 10. I thanked him for the information and left. On the way out, I saw a pretty engineer who worked for Atherton getting into her car. She looked around as if she was nervous. You'd think she had, "I'm that wild little thing," written on her forehead. I immediately realized that she wanted to be commanded and ordered all sorts of obscene things. The problem was that I didn't know how to meet her. All my contacts in Atherton were through Atherton himself, and he certainly would not have offered her. I also knew the production manager. Her name was Sue or something like that. I once tried to hit on Sue. One of the nice things about married women is that they leave no doubts. Some are ready for a relationship, others are ready for nothing. In terms of those who would never agree, Sue would be number one. When I first approached her, barely having time to say hello, she immediately stated that she had already heard about me, and it was better for me to stay away from her and all the other women in the company. There are few things that scare me, but she had me backing down before she even finished her speech. Like I said, this Molly just fell from the sky. I was doing my rounds on Atherton one day and was getting ready to leave. She walked past me, batted her eyelashes, and smiled widely. The next week it happened again. She walked, swaying her hips, as if deliberately demonstrating herself. I didn't have to wait a third time. I turned and asked where her office was. She pointed in the direction. I said, "Let's go." Damn it, if she didn't head there immediately, without question, without hesitation, just obey. I thought to myself that this could be something serious. We entered her office, and I closed the door. I had an almost menacing expression on my face, because romance is not where you should start with such women. She was shaking all over, and I decided to see how far I could go. One thing I've learned over the years is that if a woman tells you no, then chances are it won't work out with her. You have to teach them that the only right answer is yes. I'm usually careful, starting slow and then picking up the pace, but not with her. She clearly wanted this. The next time Molly and I crossed paths, it was in the laboratory. I walked in and shouted something rudely. She looked quite scared and said she wanted to make rules. Didn't she understand the lesson? I asked why I should care about any rules at all. It was time to leave again. I was overcome with desire again. Damn it. I had to find another one of my regular girls and take my anger out on her again. These malicious sessions began to get me into trouble. But it was her fault. It's not my fault she doesn't understand fast enough. But I knew that if I tamed this engineer properly, the reward would be worth it, even if it meant losing a couple of regular girls. The third time is lucky, as they say. I had to take action, otherwise she might get scared. Well, I decided that she could please me. I entered her office and closed the door. I told her to meet me at the Holiday Inn. She almost went crazy with impatience. We met several times at a truck stop. I needed to figure out the next step. I decided that she would have to pay. She knew she had to obey. Yes is the only acceptable answer. She said others were using the place, and it would be bad for her reputation if she was seen there. I would have made her do it anyway, but I couldn't afford to make Atherton angry over some girl. I told her we would use Pines. She will pay. She will book a room. I'll tell her when. She didn't like it very much, but she still said yes. Oh yeah, it just kept getting better. Well, that's when everything went wrong. I pulled up to a dingy motel, and she stood there, ready for anything. Then some idiot suddenly appears and says that he is her husband. I told him it didn't matter because she belonged to me. He began to object, but such things must be stopped immediately. Otherwise, he will soon declare that he is going to punch me in the face. I did what I could. Hit him a couple of times. He fell and looked pathetic, and I had to call 911. She was still just standing there. I showed her the black eye and told her that this idiot hit me first. She seemed to understand. I was arrested. They said I almost killed the guy. Damn it, I think I only hit him once. I have a good lawyer. Well, I say I have a good lawyer, but so far he hasn't done anything. While I was awaiting trial, the lawyer told me not to communicate with her. Come on, I found out that her husband was angry and lived with mommy. This is good for me. I received my $500 and planned to rent a room for Mr. Abbott. I called her and began to gently say, yes, I know, it was a big mistake, but I could have ended up in prison. I said that I missed her and that we needed to meet just once. No nonsense, just meet. She said no. She said she remembered what I told her. I can count on her. Damn if she didn't keep her word. I thought, how did I get so lucky? First of all, and then some idiot showed a video and said that my bruise was from my car. How do they even know such things? My lawyer did a good job of making it look like he was just guessing. I felt relieved. And then, video. Damn cell phone video. From afar, but you could understand who was on it. I was completely screwed. It's not my fault. The damn woman of easy virtue decided to get in and lie. It's not on me. She testified. Her helpless husband testified. The video showed that everything was as he said. He didn't even make anything up. I ended up in shit because she lied. I'll get her. I told my lawyer that Molly wanted me to kill him. During the fight, she just stood there. She didn't even ask me to stop. But she didn't look like someone who wanted to kill her husband. I told the lawyer that he had a great reputation. He must portray her as the organizer of this whole affair. He tried to warn me that I was taking a risk. I scared him and forced him to go to the prosecutor. It's my skin in the game. He'll do what I say or I'll punch him in the face. It was her plan, she lied, and I became the victim. The lawyer returned and said that the prosecutor was interested. Interested? What the hell does that mean? He wants to punish Mrs. Smith. She lied and he wants her. I asked what would happen to me for this. If you testify about a conspiracy to harm Mr. Smith, he will serve 10 years. I looked at him like he was crazy. Worst case scenario, what do I get for simple assault? He said probably 3-5 years. Why should I get involved in this conspiracy? He said, you made me suggest this. Don't blame me. He seemed to be letting me know that dancing time was over. I was angry. It's not my fault, because Molly lied. My opportunity to get out with minimal punishment is gone. Bitch, and my cool lawyer let me down too. Why is he even listening to me? They gave me until Monday to make a decision. Greg Atherton called me on Saturday and said he wanted to talk to me. We chose a place where we would not be seen and sat down to discuss the matter. He said that he would pay me $100,000 a year if I would go to prison and give the correct evidence against her. I wanted more money and less time. He said that she also wants me to live somewhere else after leaving. She was afraid of what I would do to her. Well, she was right about that. I told him I wanted $200,000 a year and $500,000 for moving. In 5 years, I will earn $1.5 million. We made a deal. Atherton had to be very careful. Bribing a witness could put him next to me. We agreed on how payments will be made. I called my lawyer and told him I screwed up. Molly babbled something during sex, but she never seriously asked me to harm her husband. He tried to tell me that I couldn't change my testimony. I convinced him that when faced with prison, I had lost my head. His job is to get me out of this. My lawyer went to the prosecutor on Monday and said that I had lost my head. The guy threatened me. I couldn't hear anything on the video, so I looked bad. But the threat made me hit him. Then this woman, who was not right in her head, gave evidence, as it seemed to her, in my favor. She said all sorts of stupid things during sex. But I didn't want to say that she asked me to kill him. In the end, they agreed to 5-7 years. Most likely I'll get an A. But I'll have to testify to what she said. I make about $70,000 a year painting. And here I will earn 3 times more, sitting in a small cell. Molly Smith. I'm sitting in the courtroom next to my lawyer. We're told the jury has reached a verdict. My father always told me not to put myself in a situation where your fate depends on the kindness of strangers and now 12 of them are deciding whether I belong in prison. How did I get to this point? My name is Molly Smith, at least for now. Regardless of whether I end up in prison, I don't think my sweet husband will want to be with me much longer. I suspect that he has not yet filed for divorce and was attending my court to help in any way he could, although we have not communicated or lived together since I arrested. At school, I was a quiet, diligent student. I've always been fascinated by how things work. I was one of the top students in math and science and decided I wanted to become an engineer. I received a full scholarship to UCLA. I continued to be a good student, but I also began to develop a social life. I learned that I love sex. All kinds of sex, but especially rough, unbridled sex. My roommate kept warning me that sometimes the bad boys I wanted weren't funny at all, but just bad. One of them could hurt me or worse, so I was as careful as possible. I began to separate my encounters. Some I met among students with whom I might want to build relationships, others in bars in poor areas. Back then, I thought I liked rough and maybe even forbidden sex. I dated guys in hopes of finding someone I could love and who would love me. When I find the right person, we will be lovers. But no relationship lasted very long, and I couldn't understand why. I had never met those who studied with me on the courses. They all seemed so reliable, not the ones I was looking for. Plus, they all acted like loving puppies. Well, all except one Dave Smith. He was a mystery. In my 4th year, I decided that I wanted to change. I needed to settle down. I approached Dave and asked him why he never tried to court me. It ended with a date. He was so cute that I wanted to bring him to my room. He shocked me. He said no. I soon realized that I could have both the love and the wild sex I craved so much with Dave Smith. I loved him enough to trust him with my need for rough sex. Our love led to us introducing each other to our parents. When we went to Rivertown, not only did we meet Dave's family, but I was also introduced to Greg Atherton and Atherton Products. I found my dream job. They sell custom vans that are equipped to transport a variety of products to their many clients. They equipped vans to deliver hot pizza, cold beer, heavy welding equipment, light party supplies, and everything in between. Some trucks were used for multiple purposes and should have been easily converted by the owner. I was introduced to the work of the company by the owner and president himself, Greg Atherton, and by the end of the day, I had already agreed on a job and a starting salary. When I met Dave after the tour, I was so excited that I announced, "We will live here after the wedding." And he hasn't even proposed to me yet. One of my first tasks was to develop a clamp. Atherton vans are equipped with poles attached to the roof and floor inside the van. Multifunctional vans sometimes had hooks on poles, sometimes shelves, and the owner needed to quickly change the configuration. It took over 3 years to develop, but I invented and patented the Atherton clamp. It was simple but very effective. The clamp has been specially designed for these van poles. It was equipped with a spring with a trigger, like a bear trap, which snapped the clamp shut. The spring was not strong, it could not injure anyone if it accidentally slammed on someone. What kept the clamp in the closed position was the slight twist as it closed that locked it in place. But by simply turning it in the opposite direction, it could be easily opened. I worked for a long time to perfect the clamp. I made a couple of prototypes, and they worked perfectly. The clamps were closed and fixed on an inch pole. A stainless steel ring was attached to the outside of the clamp. Many of our standard products were attached to these rings. The clamps allowed for endless configuration options within the van. The van could be equipped to carry large, heavy items and then easily be converted into shelves for hundreds of small, light items in just a few minutes. Our customers were able to quickly customize their vans to suit each customer's individual needs. Then came my big moment. I brought 2 prototypes to Mr. Atherton. His first reaction was suppressed. He suddenly lit up and said, "That would be ideal," but stopped and blushed. I had no idea why he was embarrassed, but it made me uncomfortable too. He muttered something under his breath, then pulled himself together. Later, I accidentally found out that he was thinking about using these clamps for self-bondage. I had never heard of self-bondage or even thought about it. My curiosity was piqued. First a spark, and then more and more. My fantasies were soon completely taken over by the image of me being tied up and helpless. This led to experimentation at home. I've practiced many times. I knew I had about a minute to get ready. I heard Dave come in and call me. Believe me, it takes a lot of practice to hit the pole blindfolded, but where there is a will, there is a way. Dave had no way of knowing how long I was in this position, a minute or an hour. He entered the room. The more I thought about it, the more disappointed I felt. I was so vulnerable he could do anything to me. But he didn't go crazy, he didn't use me roughly, he just made love to me. Gentle sex didn't satisfy my need, it only inflamed it even more. There was so much that could be done. You don't tie yourself down to make love. It suddenly dawned on me. The person I loved and wanted to cherish and respect me was not the one who could also use and humiliate me. It was a comforting thought in a way. I needed love, support, and affection. It was wrong to expect opposite behavior from the same person. I was lucky to have such a loving husband. I decided to put my perverted nature aside in all its manifestations. Dave was loving and faithful to me. I will be faithful to him. I didn't want him to force me into submission, so I'll have to give it up. It was a logical decision, just like they taught me in engineering school, but it didn't calm the emotional fire that was burning inside me. Rumors spread that Greg Atherton drove his wife away due to his need for kinky sex and bondage, and he's been alone ever since. I loved Mr. Atherton, not as a man, but as a teacher, a mentor, and suddenly as a man with a weakness that I began to understand more and more. My logical mind began to tell me that being loyal to Dave meant not loving anyone else. But having your own submissive boss is not treason. I became increasingly aggressive with Greg Atherton at work. Every time I did this, he became more submissive. We both liked it. It became our routine and satisfied my needs. But soon this was not enough. The problem was that I myself wanted to be the one tied to the bed. Atherton assigned me to work with the production manager, Sue Dobson. In the first few weeks, we discussed Atherton products and how to improve product quality and significantly increase production volumes. We didn't talk much about our families or home life. I knew that, like me, she was married and without children. When I started talking about Dave, she often turned the conversation back to business, such as how to add another shelf to a particular model. I once mentioned that I like hard or rough sex. She said she's the complete opposite, afraid she's too correct. We were on the verge of discussing personal topics that we had always avoided. Suddenly, she suggested having dinner with our husbands. I liked the idea, and we planned dinner at the country club. When we met, there was an immediate spark between Sue and Dave. It turned out that they were childhood friends. It was a great evening, and we all became close friends. After that, Sue and I talked about everything. She was worried about her marriage. She simply was not ready to expand her boundaries, as she put it, in her relationship with her husband. I told her that for me, it's the other way around, and I have to restrain myself. I admitted to her that if I had been left to my own devices, I would have long ago become someone's slave. I just couldn't get my sweet, loving husband to behave like that. Sue laughed and said she wished she could be like me. Then her face became serious, and she warned me to stay away from Ray Harrison, our paint supplier. He was passionate about dominating married women. He even tried to approach her several times. I assured her that I would be careful. But another seed was planted, and it began to grow quickly. I had nothing to do with the paint. Greg Atherton handled the initial specifications, and the purchasing department maintained the required inventory. I saw Ray a few times, and he was handsome. Tall, muscular, with a stern look, and of course, irresistible. This grain became a real obsession. I was simply drawn to his reputation for pushing women's boundaries. I decided that I had to seduce him. I went to my favorite lingerie store and bought a seductive set: bra, panties, and garter belt. Everything was made of black lace translucent material. I wanted him to be impressed. He always came to the offices on Tuesday mornings. Sometimes I met him, but most often I didn't. We had already seen each other, but I was not ready. Now I was in full combat readiness. I walked past him and said, "Hi." He looked at me, and I don't know what it was, but it was like he saw right through me. He told me to go to his office and wait at the door. That's what I did. He came in, walked past me, and closed the door. If I had even an ounce of common sense, this would be the end of it. But now I was fixated on meeting his demands. This was the beginning of my end. After he left, I found his business card in my papers and called him. He didn't answer. I left a message explaining that this was all a bit rough for me and that I would like to find some middle ground that would work for both of us. He didn't call back. On Thursday, I saw him again in the engineering laboratory. I was there alone. He came in. Surprisingly, I turned Dave down that weekend. He asked what was wrong, and I said I just didn't feel well. I'd never used that excuse before, so he probably believed me. I was so nervous and so excited for that Tuesday that I thought I was going to explode. He came to my office around 11 a.m. and said we were going to lunch. I just nodded. We got into his car and drove to the Holiday Inn. One day, he wanted to have sex with me in my office, but I had meetings all day. Sue was already waiting for me outside. He said we would go to the Pines Motel the next day at 1 p.m. He wouldn't pay for a room for someone like me, so I had to get a room. I simply nodded. Sue came in and didn't say anything. I was afraid she heard something, but maybe she didn't. The next day, I sneaked out of the office. I went into the motel and noticed that the security camera there was not working, or something was wrong with it. She moved jerkily and looked only at numbers 8 to 12. I asked the manager to give me number 5. I paid in cash. I hoped that all the humiliation would begin after we were inside. I drove to number 5 and quickly parked. Ray immediately drove up to number 6. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, Dave appeared. Never in my life have I experienced such a feeling. They exchanged a few words, and Ray hit Dave hard. My insanity has just seriously hurt my husband. I was so ashamed that I just stood there. Ray walked away, gave himself a black eye, took my phone, called 911, and told me to report the fight. When I hung up, he said that if I ever wanted him again, I would have to say that Dave hit him first. As always, I simply nodded. When the ambulance arrived, I shook off my numbness. The police wanted to question me, but I firmly said that I would go to the hospital with my husband. While the police were interviewing Ray, the last time I saw him was when I got into Dave's ambulance. He was completely unconscious. I felt sick. I don't know why I didn't do anything. I saw what was happening and knew that my life was over. I just let it happen. I hoped that I could do something to save my marriage because I loved Dave so much. After being discharged from the hospital, Dave stayed with his parents. He was very angry with me. He eventually returned home, but stayed in the guest room. Several times I secretly made my way to him to make love. We avoided the topic of Ray. Shortly before the trial, he spoke to me and told me to tell the truth. It felt strange to me when he said this, as if he was warning me, and I knew it. For some reason, the prosecutor was the first to call me in for questioning. The prosecutor asked me a couple of questions before getting to the main point. What did I see? I said my husband hit Ray, and he hit back. Ray had a smug look on his face, and then I looked at Dave. He sat staring straight ahead, making no sound or making any movement, only tears running down his cheeks. The strangest question was the prosecutor's last question. He asked what I would say if the motel had security cameras. I took it as an opportunity because I knew the cameras weren't working, and so I asked with hope in my voice, "Are they working?" The prosecutor simply answered, "No, there are no cameras," with a smile full of confidence, and sat down in his seat. Ray's lawyer said he would postpone cross-examination until the defense began making its case. The judge granted his request. I was waiting for Dave. I wanted to explain to him why I did what I did, but he didn't want to talk. Instead, he simply walked away. I knew Dave was the next witness. He testified that he was hit on the sly. I was not present at the next days of the trial, but they turned out to be a disaster. Greg Atherton called me. He said I needed to come up with a strategy. I was able to attend Ray's final day of trial. The defense lawyer immediately stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, the defense and the prosecution have reached an agreement, Defense Attorney Williams said. What kind of agreement is this? The defendant will change his plea to guilty to one charge of simple assault. He agrees to be punished with imprisonment for a term of 5 to 7 years. Does the prosecution agree? Yes, Your Honor. Then it is decreed. I was desperate. It wasn't said out loud, but part of the deal was that Ray would testify against me, claiming that I had set this all up. Luckily, Greg and I had already begun to develop our plan. I met with Dave one last time before my own legal cases began. I suppressed my regrets and told him what I needed. We had almost $50,000 saved up for a house, and I needed all of that money to pay legal fees. Without hesitation, he said that the money was mine. With this generous gesture of his, I could not allow myself to cry. I've been set up, and I'm going to have to reveal more than I ever wanted to get out of this shit. You lied to me and said you didn't see anything. And then I realized that you couldn't sell this lie. And instead of telling the truth, you decided, why don't I lie in such a way as to justify my beating? Isn't that enough? No, Dave, I'm sorry, but there's something else. Ray is such a bad guy. He was like catnip on me. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but he and I once met at a Holiday Inn. He was rough with me, and damn, I loved it. I agreed to a second meeting. He made me pay for the room, and when you showed up and he beat you up so badly, he told me right then that if I didn't tell you that you started the fight to keep him out of jail, he'd make sure you found out it wasn't the first time. I was scared. I knew that I would lose you if I admitted that this was our second meeting. I had to lie and hope I could get you back. Well, if you remember, I begged you to tell the truth, or you'll end up exactly where you are now. You used to love playing bad girl with me. I regretted that you stopped. Looks like you regret it now, too. But you must understand that there is no turning back. I'm so sorry for everything. We'll miss you more than you can imagine. The hardest part was yet to come. He stood up and wished me luck as if I were a stranger. He took me by the shoulders, kissed me on the cheek, and without saying a word, without a smile, he turned and left. This was the end of us, and oh God, it was so cold. When the second video came out, I was done. It was obvious that Ray would now change his story. Me and my humble stupidity found ourselves in plain sight, all alone. Moreover, from the way he treated me, it became clear that I would be made a scapegoat. Greg wanted me to meet him at his house. It was private, and no one would see me. When I entered, he was wearing a collar and on his knees. It was somehow difficult to see him as a strategic genius. I asked him to get dressed. The polite request made it clear that now was not the time for games. He may be a wimp, but he has an amazing mind. He said it was quite possible they would claim that I was the brains behind this whole conspiracy. I squealed. How can I be to blame? Well, you're in an affair with him, and in earnest. You do favors for him, and he does something else to you. You decide it's time to stop everything. You make an appointment with him at a cheap motel and rent a room. You tell Dave you'll be there. You tell your lover that Dave is a cruel person and will hurt him. This is all not true. Molly, he made you lie for him. The prosecutor realized this. He called you first so that when you lied, he could catch you too. He's already after you, and Ray has a motive to feed him a lead. I will be sent to prison forever. I started crying uncontrollably. Not necessarily. Ray's motive is not set in stone. But it doesn't matter. That's what I want you to do. You have to think about your true version. Rehearse it, and then come to me, and I will help you make it perfect. We don't have much time. Fine. One more thing. In my opinion, during your testimony, you seemed overly concerned about whether there was video of you outside the motel. Why? Did you seem to know something? Did you see me testify? I didn't see you. You don't have to be there to see. I explained that I saw broken equipment. Come up with another story. Ray told you. This is critical. Now go to work. On Monday, everything will go to hell. New version, great. If I change my testimony, the prosecutor will attack me with redoubled fury. Greg must be right. They will make me guilty. I have to make myself a victim. Why would I be a victim? I found myself in an affair with a man who found in me a need to be submissive. This will never work. This will only confirm his version. The truth just won't work, not in any form. I need to think. But as Greg says, there is no time. I came home and went to bed. It was early, and I slept in a shallow sleep, full of anxiety. But around midnight, I woke up with an epiphany. Blackmail, blackmail might work. He forced me to lie under threat, and when an unknown video appeared, he made up his story. Greg was right. He must have known about the video. The bastard made me register. How could he know this? Maybe it wasn't Ray. A new thought popped into my head. I happened to meet his lawyer before I gave my testimony. We were in the hotel lobby. I walked up to him, asked if I could talk to him, and he stopped for a second, saying that talking to a witness in the case was completely unacceptable. He left. I looked after him because I really wanted to ask him, but then I thought what in the words, totally unacceptable, left me with the opportunity to speak. I left. Maybe this will come in handy. I told Greg, and he liked my version. We worked on it, and he became strict with me. He shouted, "Don't smile. Can you make your voice shake? Look unsure. Get rid of your attitude." I would have hugged him, but it would have distracted us, and I needed a man, not a mouse. Monday morning came, and I knew my time was running out. I went to work, and before lunch the police came and arrested me. They handcuffed me and took me out like a hardened criminal. I've never felt so alone. As we walked past Greg, he said, "This is a workplace. I don't care what you say she did. My employees deserve better treatment on company property." A couple of months later, my trial began. I was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit serious harm, accessory to assault and battery, and a few other things that just flew past me. Oh yes, and almost laughably in perjury. The prosecutor described me as a despicable, low-life cheater whose blatant disregard for marital vows led me to deliberately seek to cause serious harm to my faithful, church-going, loving husband. I went numb after that. My lawyer said a few good things about me, and the case began. The prosecutor called the clerk, who checked me into the motel. He called a man who recorded a video of Ray beating Dave while I just stood there. They showed a short video from the motel. The prosecutor presented this without much emotion, simply introducing the facts, and said nothing about what it meant. Every time a witness testified, my lawyer stood up and said, "There are no questions." The list of evidence and accusations grew, and I was afraid that everything was lost. I'm here because of the Harrison trial. The DA told me not to lie. Then Dave said Garland told him he didn't need to warn me so I wouldn't lie. He told me this when he himself warned me not to lie. All this pressure made it obvious what I had to do. Lie. Since I knew there was no video proof of my presence at the motel check-in, the least evil for everyone was to lie. There is also the fact that perjury is rarely punished. People lie in the dock, but their lies usually do not affect the outcome of the case. The witness says he saw the defendant on the other side of town during the crime, so he is not guilty. The witness is a close friend of the accused. The accused is found guilty, and it becomes clear that the witness lied. Why worry? The verdict has already been passed. The jury is unlikely to say that it was a lie, rather, it was a mistake. Let everything take its course. But this district attorney has a God complex and sees the lies before him as a challenge to heaven itself. So I said my husband started the fight when in fact he was hit on the sly. There were no serious injuries and Ray would have been released if my testimony had held up. It's so simple. This led to my trial and the opening statement to the jury. She stood by and let her man be beaten almost to death and lied about it. She is guilty of lying. She was an accomplice in the beating. She probably liked it. The state will prove all elements of the charge. My lawyer said Garland is stretching himself too far. He could have prosecuted me for perjury, but he wanted to make me the reason for the beating. Garland was confident that he could build his career on this accusation, perhaps one day becoming governor. His ambition made him a formidable opponent, but also vulnerable. We had a chance to exploit his overzealousness defensively. Ray Harrison testified that we had a torrid affair for many months. He did not specify how much exactly. They showed surveillance video from the Holiday Inn. Harrison also said that we met many times at the Good Riders truck stop. Camera footage was not kept in the parking lot for more than a week unless there were incidents. But the clerk recognized Harrison. The clerk said Harrison always registered under the name Scott Abbott. Abbott's name appeared on the register for several months in a row. Harrison also testified that I was there and saw everything. I showed that Dave hit him first. Harrison testified that often during our meetings I told him that he was my man. I told him he was better than my Dave. I told him I cared about him, not Dave. I wanted him, and Dave was on the way. They were judgmental words, but they didn't go as far as asking him to do anything. My lawyer was very good at cross-examination. He asked Ray if he had affairs with other women. Ray began to prevaricate, and Garland countered that Harrison was not on trial and that it was irrelevant to the case. The judge upheld the objection, and my lawyer pretended to be hit in the heart. His dramatic behavior led to the judge rebuking him, and he apologized but looked at the jury as if the judge's decision was unfair. My lawyer came to talk to me. He didn't say much, just asked for a nod. I nodded. We were discussing Scott Abbott, and my lawyer knew how long my affair with Harrison had been going on. After speaking with me, my lawyer requested parking records. He chose the date 6 months before Harrison, and I started dating. Look at the signature and date. Are you alleging that on this date you and my client engaged in illicit sex? Harrison became nervous. It doesn't look like my handwriting. Understand, did someone else sign for you? I was told that other people use this alias for the same reason I do. Objection, Your Honor, these are rumors. The judge didn't even raise an eyebrow. This is your witness, Mr. Garland. The objection is rejected. Later, when re-examined, Garland forced Harrison to admit that several of the signatures were indeed his, and they indicated meetings with me. Under recross-examination, Harrison admitted that he did not know exactly how many times this had happened, perhaps several. My lawyer also questioned Harrison about how I allegedly loved him more than Dave. He asked when I said this. Ray began to fuss, saying, "Many times." My lawyer asked what was happening when I said this. Ray didn't understand. Was this at dinner? Ray said we never went to dinner. Was it at a bar or at a dance? No, we didn't do that either. What were you doing? We met in the room and did it. So, was this while you were doing it? Ray admitted that this was happening then. Were there other moments? No, that was the only time I said it. My lawyer asked if I started saying things like that, or if he pushed me to do so. Harrison lowered his head and said he was teasing me. He turned me on and then forced me to say these words. He added that I liked it, said I was prone to weird things. Then came a series of questions about whether I wanted to be exposed. Ray said I was paranoid about losing Dave and took every precaution. He was asked if I ever wanted Dave to get hurt. He replied no. My lawyer sat down. Garland was angry during the re-examination. He reminded Ray that he had testified under oath that I said I wanted him, not Dave. What did I say that Dave was in the way? Harrison confirmed that I really said all this. Garland smiled and sat down. My lawyer stood up again and asked when I said all these things. Harrison confirmed that, as he said, this happened when he bombarded me with questions during our session. My lawyer asked if Ray felt he could force me to say anything during our meetings. Ray smiled smugly and said, "Of course." Harrison was released from questioning. The rest of Garland's case consisted of transcripts of my sworn testimony, the phone video that proved I was lying, and the Holiday Inn video. There were also registration records from the Good Riders truck stop, which included numerous Scott Abbott signatures. It was a simple and straightforward presentation of the facts. Garland finished his job. My lawyer was great in his opening statement. He said he was completely confused. The prosecutor turned the mistake into an attempt to ruin the woman's life. Yes, she cheated on her husband, and she is paying for it. But the defense's first witness was Judy Staples. Judy revealed that she and Ray were lovers. Their most frequent hangout was at the Good Riders truck stop. She knew that Ray registered under the name Scott Abbott. She always waited for him in the parking lot and never caught the eye of the motel staff. She hoped she wouldn't get caught. But she was caught anyway, and now she is divorced. She knew Ray took a lot of women there. This testimony was subject to a hearsay objection, which was granted, but the jury has already heard it. Under cross-examination, Garland tore it to pieces. Did she know if Molly Smith was one of these women? She didn't know. Did she know that Ray had many lovers at the same time? She didn't know. Did she know that Ray was registering under the name Scott Abbott? She didn't know. He was pleased with the result. My lawyer asked one question during re-examination. Did she have a long-term relationship with Ray Harrison, and did they meet in a truck stop motel room during that period? She confirmed that this was the case. Two different motel clerks were then called. Both testified that a really large, well-built man they recognized from Ray's photo had checked into the motel under the name Scott Abbott. They were asked if anyone else had registered under this name. Both laughed at this question. One even added that sometimes Scott Abbott was a woman. No one cared as long as the $500 deposit was made. None of them could say for sure which of the signatures might have belonged to someone else who used that name. Finally, I myself went to the podium in my own defense. I said this was all the work of Harrison and his lawyer. Harrison told me that if I didn't lie in my statement, he would expose our affair at the Holiday Inn, and I would lose my husband. I had no choice. I testified that one morning when I returned to my desk, I found a note asking me to contact an attorney named Williams at the Marriott Hotel. I got there at the appointed time, and the man told me that there was a video that showed nothing and not to worry. He continued to walk on without acknowledging me. I didn't understand what he meant, but the next day, when the prosecutor asked me, "What if there is a video?" I suddenly realized that I could handle this. I was in a no-win situation, and the only way to save my marriage was to say Dave started the fight. And then, when it's all over, tell Dave that I was forced to testify like this in order to free Ray. I was going to tell him that I almost cheated on him and Dave saved me. I hoped that the fact that he didn't know about the time Ray and I met at the Holiday Inn and his love for me would help save our marriage. I burst into tears. When I came to my senses, I testified that when the second video came out, it showed Ray severely beating Dave, and everyone saw it. Ray and this shady lawyer hatched a plot to reduce Ray's sentence. The deal was concluded. I was thrown to the wolves. My lawyer asked me how I could stand and watch what was happening and still give such testimony. I replied, referring to the video. The scene was creepy. I stood motionless, no matter what, as if frozen. I barely moved until Ray handed me the phone. I told him that I had never experienced anything like this. I got involved in this affair and was so afraid that I would be exposed that when it happened, I was simply numb. It was like nothing I had ever experienced. I didn't know what to do and just froze. When I was asked to confirm that Dave hit first, to be honest, I just didn't know. I paused and tried to look as scared and confused as possible, as if I was completely confused. Garland was merciless on cross-examination. He mocked me, said it was the biggest lie he'd ever heard in the dock. He was objected to. He said I lied to get here. One more objection, and the judge told him to ask questions rather than make judgments. Then Garland looked at me coldly and said, "Let's talk about your perjury in this testimony." There was another objection from my lawyer and an indifferent look on my part. You see, a big part of what Greg and I worked on was making sure I felt confident in giving my testimony. Since most of them were indeed lies, I could not be confused or admit it. Otherwise, I would have ended up as someone's girl in prison, which I thought was not the worst possible outcome. Garland said I testified that I met Ray once at a Holiday Inn. Greg and I decided that I would have to confess to this episode because they had CCTV footage, and the way I walked in with Ray left no doubt as to why we were there. I confirmed that we actually met there. He said that I claimed that this was the only time. I agreed. To be fair, I knew this was the only time they could prove it. Meetings in my office were just between us. Truck stop meetings didn't exist at all. Well, we had a plan in case someone saw me there. I knew they didn't see us together. I met him in the room and left before him. If someone testified that they saw me there, I would admit that I was there with Greg. He was ready to do this for me. It would have terrible consequences for both of us, but it would make me look like just a random woman of easy virtue who was walking around, and it would be unlikely that I would be plotting with one of my clients to harm my husband. This was a backup plan that Greg and I hoped we wouldn't have to use. Fortunately, this did not happen. Garland recalled that Harrison claimed that we met at the truck stop many times. I remember glancing briefly at the jury. They didn't like that question. In the end, Harrison admitted that it had only happened a few times. Ray Harrison and I never met in that parking lot for any reason ever. He started trying to confuse me, who was lying, Harrison or me. I have no idea why Mr. Harrison gave such testimony. All I can say is that Ray Harrison and I were never in that place for any reason. He started asking me questions about the conspiracy. These questions were easy and my answers were sincere. I didn't want Dave to get hurt. I hurt him just by being there. I hurt him by going to the Holiday Inn. I hurt him without trying to stop the beating. I hurt him when I relayed what I was told while I was in a stupor. That Dave struck first. Maybe Garland was so hell-bent on accusing me of conspiracy that he didn't even bother to look into my first lie that Dave had struck first. He was more interested in my conversations with Ray. I blushed when I said that Ray and I had never had a serious conversation. He made me admit that I said I wanted Ray, not Dave. Greg and I worked really hard on this. I straightened up, turned to the jury, and said, I wish I could remember everything I said while humiliating myself. Honestly, I can't. I know he made me say things like that he was great and my husband wasn't. But he never asked, and I never said that we wanted to hurt Dave. They had a clash. She's on video. To my shame, I did nothing to stop her, and I didn't do anything to start it. The last set of questions concerned my statement that a member of the bar approached me and told me that I should not be afraid of the video. I confirmed that this is true. He said it was unheard of. This would be illegal, highly unethical, and such a lawyer would be disbarred. I replied that I didn't know the laws, but that's exactly what they told me. I sat straight, did not tremble under his questions, and did not look away when answering them. He was excited, and I was calm. The next defense witness was the truck stop manager. He was asked if he knew Scott Abbott, and he chuckled. As his employees testified, people encountered in the parking lot often registered as Scott Abbott. He said guests are required to pay for the room and leave a $500 cash deposit. After they left the room, they went to the motel diner and waited for the room to be checked. If there was no damage, they got their $350 back and went home happily. The manager was asked if he had ever seen me in this parking lot. He replied no. He also said that we had offered a $1,000 reward to any of his employees who could identify me based on the photograph. None of them were able to choose my photo from the set of 10 we provided them with. I wondered, while he was testifying, why he did it and how much it cost Greg to get that testimony. My defense also presented a video from the Marriott hotel lobby in which Harrison's lawyer and I accidentally crossed paths. I said something briefly, then he spoke a little longer, we walked past each other, and I looked back with a curious expression on my face. The video matched my testimony that the lawyer said not to worry about the motel video. The video had no sound and was filmed from above, so it was clear that there was a conversation going on, but it was impossible to understand what exactly was said. Harrison's lawyer was called to rebuttal. He stated that we just happened to pass each other. I started to say something, but he stopped me and said that he could not talk to the witness outside the court. He said that he is an ethical lawyer and such statements could damage his reputation, which he does not intend to tolerate. My lawyer did not cross-examine him. My lawyer was brilliant in his closing argument. He said that everyone agreed on one thing. I showed that Dave hit Harrison first, and it turned out to be untrue. I admitted my confusion and regretted it. It was also quite understandable that because of one mistake and a misguided attempt to hide this mistake, I could accept someone else's story as the truth. I was involved in an affair with another man and wanted to lie to save my marriage. I hoped that I could hide my mistake. Then my lawyer moved on to other participants in the events. Harrison, defending himself against criminal charges, forced me to lie, and when that didn't work, he made up a story about a conspiracy to harm my husband. He admitted in the doc that he made me say certain things when I was excited and that he enjoyed teasing me. These statements mean nothing. Harrison has proven himself to be a liar. His lies were serious. My white lies didn't matter much. Prosecutors fell for Harrison's lies. The prosecutor tried to charge me with attempted murder. The jury saw me during the attack. I was paralyzed with fear. Such people are not involved in conspiracies to kill or inflict bodily harm. Prosecutors made a huge mistake by believing Harrison, and the jury should have been smarter. Finally, the attorney turned to video from the Pines Motel and the Marriott Hotel. The Pines Motel video could have been very dangerous for me, and when I was asked about it, I really wanted to see it. Why would I be so worried? A plausible explanation is that someone told me that the video didn't show anything. I testified that Harrison's lawyer said it, and there was video evidence that we actually spoke. What other explanation could there be? He concluded his speech by recalling that in a criminal case, guilt must be proven beyond reasonable doubt. I admitted that I had cheated on my husband and sincerely repented of it. I admitted that I was trying to say that Harrison got hit first to save his marriage from the fallout of his infidelity. Harrison was rightly found guilty and my lies didn't matter. As for the plot to harm my husband, that was ridiculous. I tried to save my marriage, and in fact, my husband attended all court hearings and did not file for divorce. What does this say about his confidence in my guilt? The prosecutor's office believed the convict's lies, and you, the jury, should be smarter. And they were. I was completely acquitted. Even for perjury, which I admitted to, I was not convicted. I hung up and informed Greg Atherton of my excuse. I said I was going to see him. I flew into the room, dressed in a leather corset and long leather boots. You pathetic worm, I will take my anger out on you. I needed to please my boss while figuring out how to rebuild my broken life. Sue Dobson. I'm sure Dave is going to propose to me. It's time for the truth. But what is the truth? Maybe this is the wrong question. What is the truth? Well, he thinks we're both recovering from spouses who cheated on us. Our relationship was comfortable in conditions where both spouses cheated. This is true, but not really. Where to start? It would be logical to start with Dave, but I think it's better to start with my father. I went into it. I loved to build, to create something. As a child, my dad and I spent a lot of time in his workshop or went hunting or fishing. Mom was always unhappy. I was the only child in the family, a girl, but my father's daughter. This seemed terribly unfair to my mother. Dad was the head of manufacturing at Atherton Products. He initially worked in a factory owned by an automobile parts supplier. Atherton bought the factory about 25 years ago. Most of the executives remained with the parent company. Dad and a few others decided to stay because they didn't want to leave Riverton. As a senior production specialist, he became a young factory manager and eventually became head of the production department at both plants. Although Dad was the senior manager, he was the youngest among all the production managers. The oldest one was going to retire about a month after I graduated from high school. Dad really wanted me to take his position. In his opinion, this would put me in an advantageous position to take his job when he himself retired. All the other production managers were scheduled to retire before him, and he was going to hire their successors himself. I really liked the idea and started working just a few weeks after finishing school. In the fall, my dad transferred me to the night shift, and I studied during the day and worked at night. I was young and could take a nap here and there. It was easy. I finished my management degree a semester early in 4 years, and 2 years later MBA. My future was bright. The only thing that suffered was my personal life. I worked, studied, ate, slept, studied again, ate, worked, and so on in a circle, in some incomprehensible rhythm. How was I supposed to find a guy, get to know him, and build a relationship? I still haven't found the answer to this question. Although I almost always had days off on Saturday evenings and Sundays, I had no one to spend them with, and I had no energy left to search. I channeled all my energy into finding my soulmate, but instead I found John Dobson. Although he is still technically my husband, he only plays a small role in my truth. As I was finishing up my MBA, I heard that Molly Smith had started working in the engineering department. I can't explain why, but I didn't want to date her. She worked during the day, and I studied during the day. We didn't have a chance to meet each other the first year. When I finished my studies, my dad assigned me to work in a factory. I fell in love with the production process. It required expensive equipment, and therefore most of our products were purchased first. But as Atherton grew, capital became available to purchase new equipment, and we gradually began to control the production of all our products. I became the first to control the use of these new technologies, which strengthened my position in the company. Everything happened suddenly. My dad retired and asked what I wanted. I said our products were becoming too complex to manufacture, and I needed to work with Molly Smith to simplify their designs. He simply smiled and said, "And so it will be." I told him that this should only happen after he left. I wanted to get to know Molly before I was shocked by the news that she was married to my younger friend. He laughed and said, "You have more of your mother in you than you think." I asked him if he could still guarantee that I would take his position and be able to work with Molly. He laughed. Dad told me all about Greg Atherton. He was dedicated to his work and had a gift for finding the right people to do the right job. Greg had a knack for sales. He concluded large contracts with companies one after another. But Greg had and still has a huge problem. He married a socialite and they have 2 daughters. They live separately, and Greg rarely sees his children. As it turned out, he was a subordinate by nature and wanted his debutante wife to make him her subordinate. Dad stammered in embarrassment as he told me about it. I almost laughed, but I knew it wouldn't help him, so I let him finish. Dad and Greg were as close as Greg could be. He trusted Dad, and Dad could influence him. Dad said Greg would know that I knew everything Dad knew, and that would help me too. Dad said several people, including Dave's family, knew about Greg's tendencies and that he and Dad were friends. In a way, it alienated my parents from being members of the country club. But Dad's dedication to work and Mom's efforts at church left them little time for other things, so the lack of popularity didn't really bother them. Dad retired, and I was appointed as his successor. A month after he left, Greg called me into his office. When I arrived, Molly was with him, and he introduced us. He told her that I was now in charge of production, and that he thought Molly could help me by making our products easier to produce. Greg considered this the most important engineering project for the company at that time. We immediately got to work. I said earlier that I didn't know why I didn't want to meet Molly Smith. This is not entirely true. When I found out that Dave was returning to Riverton, now married, I realized that I had always loved him. No matter how much time we spent together as children, except for one moment, I never had any feelings for him. The only exception was one weekend when my parents were out of town. I was 16 and slightly obsessed with boys, but my parents trusted me. I promised that I would not go on a date, have a party, or invite boys. I really intended to keep this promise. I was sunbathing when Dave arrived. He just wanted to spend time together. We were talking, and he was also going to sunbathe. He took off his shirt, and for the first time I looked at him as a guy, and not as my younger friend. I told him to leave. I saw that it hurt him. I remember it was a strange feeling. I was too young to explain or understand my feelings, so I just kicked him out. After that, we moved away from each other. Hunting, Fishing and the like were no longer a top priority. Now the priority was the boys. I dated a lot. Looking back, I thought I had outgrown my friendship with my younger brother. I was a year older. He couldn't even drive a car yet. Our friendship seemed anachronistic. I learned too late that strong friendships are the most important part of a long-lasting romantic relationship. Dave Smith is back in town, married and in love. I, on the other hand, was ready to enjoy my job and tolerate my marriage. My husband John is the complete opposite of me. He is cool, sophisticated, confident in social situations, lazy and unfaithful. He literally swept me off my feet, and we soon got married. I was 24, he was 28. We met at a country club, where he won his third golf tournament in a row. I worked as a night supervisor in production, and John did various things. He was a tennis instructor for a couple of months out of the year. Sometimes he sold insurance. He was always looking for something to do, and surprisingly, he succeeded. As I soon realized, he worked just enough to maintain the standard of living that he liked. John had a beautiful house on the country club grounds. I thought he bought it, but it turns out he inherited it. But the house was beautiful, and we started housekeeping. In the first year, my bank account increased by at least 50% thanks to John's efforts. But then, very gradually, my balances began to decline. I asked him about it, and he apologized. He said he was going through a dry period. He often disappeared during work hours and in the evenings, and I hoped that he was trying. Over time, my relationship with my husband became normal for both of us. John cheated on me more than he did business. He was much better at cheating than he was at serious business endeavors. He was very careful, except for the occasional trace of lipstick on his clothes or strange sense of perfume. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. We were happy in our own sense. Now here's what worries me. I tell myself that I was ready to be a friend to Dave and Molly, a great production supervisor, and a contented wife. I wouldn't do anything to win the heart of my childhood friend, but my actions say otherwise. I can give you a rational explanation for every action I take, but when I look at the results, although it's gratifying, I'm not sure it was fair. This is what happened. Molly designed a clamp for our vans. She showed it to Greg, and he looked confused and started making excuses, although she didn't understand why. Molly said it made her feel awkward. As soon as Molly and I finished talking, I went to Greg and casually asked why Molly was so excited. He told me about her clamp and added that he almost said that it would be good for self-restraint. He asked me not to say anything because he was ashamed. I assured him that I wouldn't tell. What I meant was that I wouldn't let him know when I warned her. I told her that he is a natural submissive and she needs to be careful. Although she said that she would be careful, I could see from her burning neck and even her ears that my revelation turned her on. One morning, Molly and I got into an argument. She designed the shelf to ridiculously tight tolerances. Relaxing tolerances would not affect productivity, but would significantly reduce rework and waste. She didn't want to give in. I suggested we discuss this with Greg. She smiled strangely and agreed. I thought I had an advantage. Father knew damaging information about Greg, and although he never used it as a weapon, Greg always gave in to him. Greg also knew that I knew where the bodies were buried. He gave in to me too. I arranged a meeting between the three of us. When I walked into Greg's office, Molly was already sitting in one of the guest chairs in front of his desk. I took another one. I began to explain the situation. Greg stopped me. I am aware I looked at the problem myself. In this case, I think the engineering department is right. Not Molly is right, but the engineering department is right. Molly had a smug smile on her face. He may have yielded to me, but she subdued him. I was sure that she made him her dog. Both were surprised that I didn't object. Now I was smiling, and they could puzzle over what it meant. I thanked both of them, and after 5 minutes, from start to finish, our meeting ended. Now I had a plan of action. I was willing to remain Dave's friend as long as he was happily married. But in my understanding, he could not be happy in marriage if his wife was cheating on him. I hired a private investigator to document the exploits of my husband, John. It didn't take much time or money, but it established our relationship with the detective agency. Soon we had everything we needed for John. I asked the detectives to follow Molly. They didn't find anything. The lead detective suggested we meet at his office. Sue, are we doing something wrong, or is your Molly Smith as pure as snow? We only follow her on Wednesdays. Why? This is the only time she and her lover can meet. Her lover. I've been assuming this all along, but I think you know who it is. You know? Is this strictly confidential? Certainly. A detective agency that violates confidentiality is closing down faster than you think. My silence is in your interests. This is good for you. Greg Atherton. A. Understand. Big fish. They work together. Are you sure they don't have a nook in one of your offices? Excluded. Are you sure? Okay, let's leave it at that. Why only on Wednesdays? Both factories report to me. No one can enter or leave without leaving a trace, except on Wednesdays. We have a staff meeting at this time, and my eyes are all at this meeting. I can't involve others because rumors will spread quickly. Okay, you're sure about it. Let's leave it at that. Why don't we monitor every Wednesday? These are the days when Greg leaves town. How do you know that? He asked, looking at me in disbelief. Damn it! As they say, I know it because he says so himself. He publishes his calendar. Do you have a copy of it? His question sounded innocent, but it was clear that he was annoyed by an amateur who thought he knew everything. I have all the dates in my phone calendar. I opened it and we started looking. Greg is away up to 3 times a month, sometimes for a day or two, sometimes for a week. He's gone 2 or 3 Wednesdays a month. Where does he go these days? He never speaks. If you ask, he will answer, but generally speaking, for the 3 or 4 of us who have his cell number, we can call and talk. He could be in the next office or in Timbuktu, who would know? He smiled widely. Well, now at least 2 of us know, or at least have a strong suspicion. Let me remind you that I suggested discussing all started, but you said to just check the environments you recorded. Yes, your fee is fair. Well, now we have a clue. I'm sure we'll clear everything up soon. Whether your price is fair or not, I'm already at my limit. I don't want you to be claimed as my dependent. He laughed. The next 2 weeks will give us 3 good opportunities to gain information. In the meantime, I needed to meet Molly's husband. Until now, I have not allowed our friendship to develop. She couldn't reveal that her husband was Dave Smith, and I couldn't reveal that he was my childhood best friend. I had to keep our relationship strictly professional. But it's time to change that. We worked well together, and she happily agreed when I suggested we meet for dinner at the country club on Saturday night. It was hard to meet Molly and not let her tell me that her husband was my childhood friend. More than once, she began to be inclined to name him, and I had to change the topic of conversation. When I thought that everything was fine with the Smiths, I was satisfied with our work as acquaintances. But now, if she cheated, I had to find out if Dave had any feelings for me. I practiced feigning surprise at meeting him. I did it. There was a moment when Dave looked puzzled by how I could work with Molly Smith and never wonder who her husband was, but he left it without comment. I received mixed news from our meeting. Dave had very strong feelings for me, which was wonderful. But he was crazy about Molly, and that presented a problem. I was on my way out. I left early. I needed to get in the right frame of mind. Dave deserved to hear the truth from me. Without this, we would have no chance of a long-term relationship. The last person I wanted to see was Molly, but she came up to me. Sue, can you give me a minute? Not the best time, Molly. Maybe another time. She blocked my way. Sue, I know you and Dave are really serious. What I have to say will benefit both of you. Please, a couple of minutes. I felt my shoulders drop. I had accepted that I would have to listen to her, and I couldn't imagine how that would help. But we were close friends and continued to work together, So those few minutes could have changed something. Where? My office is very close. Let's sit there. I promise you will leave in a better mood than when you came. We sat down in her office. She closed the door. Molly began the conversation. I admit, I never thought about you when I helped Dave, but now I understand that it was the right thing for both you and him. Molly, really, I don't need your stream of words. Sue, please, listen to me for a few minutes. You will see that it is not what you think. I've never been jealous of Dave. I knew it wasn't necessary. I could tell that when you met again, he loved you. He loved me more then, but he was completely mine. The problem was that I wasn't completely his. You probably remember warning me about Ray Harrison. She stopped to see my reaction, and I simply nodded. I knew it. This would be a great warning if I were someone else. I laughed. Are you saying that I pushed you towards him when I warned you? I played. This is exactly why I feel guilty. I knew I was pushing her towards him. She slept with Atherton, and we talked enough for me to know that she would be caught in Harrison's web. I wanted her to get caught, divorced, and her husband to be free. I wasn't even honest with myself about this. I'm ashamed to even describe what we did with him. I love Dave with all my heart, and that's why I can't be with him. You are not together because you committed false testimony. That's what I want to talk about. I loved Dave so much. I wanted him back. I hesitated whether to tell the truth or shut up and say nothing. Molly, I raised a finger, remind me quickly, you did neither. I know. The reason why I did this is important to both you and him. Molly continued. A few days before I was supposed to testify, I got a call from Ray. He wanted to meet at a truck stop and just talk. He spoke to me tenderly. He had never uttered a single decent word to me before, but here he charmed me. Well, I knew how it would go. What's worse, I knew I would do it. I would tell the world that Dave planned the Kennedy assassination if he broke me. I told Ray to go to hell, that I would never talk to him again. I looked at her in amazement. This is all, Molly, this doesn't make sense. She wiped away her tears and continued. Remember the video from that day at the Pines? You saw my strange pose. I tried to hug Ray, but he told me, stay still, arms back, chest forward, and don't move until I tell you to. And then he hit Dave and I couldn't move. My foggy brain thought my world had collapsed, and if I just obeyed, everything would be fine. I stared at her as if she was saying something unimaginable. You can't believe this. She laughed. I know. Impossible. But the fact is that if you play for a long time at subordination to some vile tyrant, then in the end you begin to obey him. As much as I love Dave, I let him get beat up and let that bastard call 911. If I had stayed with Dave, he would have gotten hurt again, or maybe worse. I couldn't let that happen. It dawned on me. So you lied in court so that he would never want you back. She smiled. Yes, I understood everything correctly. Tell him. I really love it. But someone will come at me one day, and before I know it, I'll be beating up Dave myself just so this guy can continue to humiliate me. He's too good a man for me. Luckily, he's too honest. The public humiliation I gave him ensured that he was now safe. You know he'll appreciate it. It'll make a difference for him, and for us, him and me. He doesn't talk about it, but I know it haunts him. How could it be that his lover betrayed him in the courtroom? She cried, but quickly pulled herself together. No, tell him that Ray's call made me realize I wasn't the one for him, and I had to risk everything to get him to get rid of me. I said, I hope we can renew our friendship, although I suspect there will always be some tension around Dave. She agreed, but added that who knows what the future holds. It was important to her that Dave and I get married and live happily ever after. Now that I know it was important to her to end her marriage to Dave, I don't have to explain my role. Her truth is what Dave needs to hear. Dave Smith. What a year it has been. It started with me being madly in love with one woman, and it ends with me even more in love, but with another. The middle of the year was chaotic. I was shocked by my wife's complete betrayal. Of course, I filed for divorce. I waited until after her trial. I wasn't going to do what she did. A messy divorce would have hurt her during the trial. I was raised to be compassionate, to turn the other cheek. I could divorce her after the trial, which is what I did. I was surprised that she was acquitted, but to be honest, I didn't care anymore. She remained in the past and no longer mattered. I filed for divorce as soon as I could, and my lawyer said that according to the bailiff, she was relieved to accept the divorce papers. She immediately suggested that her share of our assets be used for her protection. She didn't want anything. A few months earlier, I had learned that Sue's husband had been caught cheating, and she was divorcing him. 2 days after I filed for divorce, Molly wrote back to her lawyer, and I called Sue that same day. We were two wounded souls who instantly became a romantic couple. We were both a little wary and cautious, but we were best friends who turned into lovers. The fact that we both made mistakes in not realizing that we were meant for each other made our romance different than what I imagine the usual fleeting relationships after divorce are. 6 months passed, and it was time to propose. I said that I would cook dinner at my apartment, and now I'm waiting for her to arrive. Here she is. You look more and more beautiful every time. She came into my arms, and we kissed. Wait a minute, otherwise we'll stay naked in the kitchen and make love on the table. Are you encouraging me or discouraging me? She laughed. Neither one nor the other. I just want to do it first. I took the ring box out of my pocket and opened it for her to see. Sue, my love, will you marry me? She took the ring, put it on, and said, "Of course, I've been waiting for this all my life." The dining table was never used, but we didn't make it to the bedroom either. The closest place was the sofa in the living room. Sue is adventurous and laughs that she was once quite shy. She feels safe with me, and we enjoy exploring each other the way we once enjoyed exploring the river cliffs as children, well, maybe even a little more than we did then. We enjoyed each other, then a delicious dinner, and began discussing our future. She said, "Molly stopped me today. She wanted to tell you why she betrayed you at the trial." I don't really care about more Molly stories. She should take up writing fiction. Sue told me the whole story. It probably made me feel better, but not much. The simple truth was that her punishments were ahead, and my rewards were also ahead. If revenge means living well, then I have already taken revenge. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.